Welcome, dear listener, to another long and gentle journey into the past, designed to help you relax, rest, and maybe even drift into a deep sleep as the world around you softens into quiet. If you find peace in slow, ancient tales and calm voices from history, be sure to subscribe and keep this sanctuary of slowness close. Tonight we step back into a time far removed from ours, a time when gods were believed to dwell among marble columns, and the air was filled with the scent of olive, oil, crushed herbs, and incense. Our story takes place in the sacred heart of ancient Greece, not among warriors or philosophers, but within the quiet, orderly life of a temple attendant, one whose days were slow, repetitive, peaceful, and deeply connected to ritual. Imagine, if you will, the early light of dawn stretching across the stone steps of a temple nestled high on a sun-warmed hillside, perhaps dedicated to Athena or Apollo, depending on the city. The sky is still a pale lilac, streaked with fading stars, and the only sound is the soft brushing of a broom across the cool marble floor, guided by the steady hands of our attendant, a young man or woman chosen not for battle or poetry, but for their quiet devotion and dependable rhythm. Their tunic is simple, woven from rough linen that scratches slightly against the skin, but it is clean and tightly belted. Around their waist is a sash that indicates their temple rank, a faded color that signals apprenticeship, but with years of service behind them nonetheless. Their feet are bare, as is tradition within holy spaces, and they move silently from column to column, gathering fallen petals from yesterday's offerings and gently sweeping away the dust that settles even in sacred places. The temple itself is waking slowly, sunlight inching across carvings of heroic myths, illuminating the distant bronze of the cult statue at its center, a towering representation of the god or goddess to whom all rituals are directed. This statue, polished weakly with scented oil, gleams faintly even in shadow. Birds begin to call in the distance, not loudly, just soft cheeps that seem to echo in the clean air, while beyond the outer gate, the first sounds of the city stir to life. The creak of a cartwheel, the quiet greeting of an old man to his neighbor, the distant bark of a dog. But here inside the temple precinct, time seems suspended, and the attendant has learned to move slowly, always slowly, because speed is not reverence. They light the oil lamps with practiced fingers, adjusting the wicks and murmuring short prayers, in a whispering tone, their breath soft as they speak the same lines they learned as a child, phrases passed down unchanged for generations. After lighting the main altar lamp, they step back and sit for a while on a stone bench tucked against a wall, taking in the scent of warmed stone and faint myrrh that lingers from the last full moon ceremony. Their tasks are simple and unhurried, refilling sacred water basins with fresh spring water, checking the offerings left by townspeople, bowls of grain, small clay figures, occasionally a wreath of laurel still damp with dew. Nothing is thrown away. Even decayed offerings are buried, with quiet prayers in a corner of the sacred grove nearby. Later, they will assist a senior priest in preparing the altar for midday devotions, carefully arranging ritual objects, a bowl, a knife, a folded cloth, a pinch of salt, each laid out with absolute symmetry. As the sun climbs higher, warm light begins to pool through the high windows, casting long shadows across the mosaic floor. Patterns of leaves, vines, and mythical beasts whose eyes seem to follow the movement of the sun. The air becomes warmer, filled with the mingled scent of olive oil burning and sun on stone. Yet still the pace remains unchanged. This is a life without rush, a life of pattern, rhythm, order, and silent reverence. It is, in many ways, a life perfectly suited to lulling the mind into calm and quiet. The attendant has no pressing thoughts of tomorrow, no urgent conversations, no worries about messages or coins or fame. There is only today, and the next task, and the next moment of silence beneath the watchful eyes of the gods. And in this way, the day begins, not with drama or noise, but with simplicity and slowness, a life that drifts gently like incense smoke, rising toward the temple roof, spiraling upward into stillness. As the morning progresses and the gentle sunlight continues to filter through the high columns of the temple, casting soft gold onto the stone floors and pale walls, the temple attendant remains immersed in the slow rhythm of their sacred duties, each task flowing into the next without any sense of rush or urgency. For this is not a life measured by speed, but by the calm repetition of small, significant acts. After finishing their initial morning responsibilities, the attendant walks slowly to the rear chamber of the temple, where the sacred vessels and tools are stored, a cool, dim space lined with shelves of polished wood and niches, carved directly into the stone, holding items that have been handled by generations of quiet hands just like theirs. Bronze cups for libations, terracotta dishes for offerings, and folded cloths washed in ritual cycles and embroidered with symbols only the eye sun der priests are taught to read. The air in this chamber is thick with the faint scent of beeswax and bay leaves, and as the attendant carefully selects the vessels for the upcoming midday rite, they pause for a moment to inspect a small crack in the rim of one of the bowls, gently running a finger over its surface as if listening for its history. Nothing in this space is ever discarded casually. Even a chipped vessel is considered worthy of reverence and must be retired through a slow, ceremonial burial in a sacred pit beyond the temple walls. Once the needed items are selected and placed in a woven reed basket, the attendant returns to the front altar, where a senior priest, an older man with a quiet voice and patient eyes, has begun arranging sprigs of fresh herbs on the low stone platform, speaking softly to the god as he works, his voice barely more than a breath above silence. The attendant places each vessel in its proper position, bowing slightly before each one touches the altar, a motion done not for show but out of long-trained habit, a gesture that has been repeated so often it has become muscle memory. As the preparations conclude, a few townspeople begin to arrive. An elderly woman walking with a staff, a young couple carrying a bundle of grain, a merchant leading a donkey with baskets filled with olives and honey. They enter slowly and speak little, their faces respectful, their movements subdued, for they too understand that the temple is a place of stillness, a space where the usual clamor of the city falls away, replaced by the hush of sacred presence. The attendant watches quietly as each person makes their offering, placing it gently before the altar, bowing their head, murmuring their wishes or thanks in voices no louder than the rustle of leaves in the courtyard beyond. The priest steps forward then and begins the formal prayers, raising his hands toward the statue of the god, speaking in the ancient tongue used only in ritual, a language that carries the weight of centuries, its syllables long and curved like the columns around them. The attendant, standing to one side, joins in where appropriate, their voice blending softly into the space, becoming just another thread in the slow fabric of ceremony. The ritual takes time. There is no hurry, for the god does not dwell in haste. And when it ends, the priest bows deeply, and so does the attendant. And then the offerings are carefully gathered and moved to the back chamber to be sorted. Some will go to the poor, some to the priests, and a few, like the sweet honey or ripest olives, will be burned later in a small offering flame as a final gift to the divine. Once the crowd disperses, leaving only quiet and the scent of warm herbs in the air, the attendant walks slowly to the shaded cloister along the edge of the temple grounds and sits on a low bench carved from stone, letting the silence settle again like dust around them. A cicada buzzes lazily in a nearby olive tree, its rhythm steady and hypnotic, and the sun dapples the stone path in shifting patterns that look almost like writing. Secret messages from the gods, perhaps, though no one would ever say such a thing aloud. The attendant sips cool water from a clay cup, the rim worn smooth from years of use, and gazes out at the courtyard garden where a few medicinal plants grow. Sage, hyssop, rue, and marjoram, used by the temple healer during festivals and rites of purification. There is no sound of conflict here, no story of heroes or monsters, only the slow, boring, peaceful repetition of a sacred life lived in stillness. The attendant, who once dreamed of adventure, has long since come to understand the beauty of this quiet service, the quiet joy of wiping down the same altar each day, of hearing the same prayers, of watching the same shadows move across the floor. And so, the day continues, drifting onward like a boat on a slow river, each ripple predictable, each moment gently cradled by the unchanging hands of tradition and time. As the sun begins its slow journey across the sky, casting a warm, amber glow through the temple's towering colonnades. The attendant rises once again from their shaded seat beneath the cloister and returns to the sacred heart of their duties, guided not by urgency, but by the gentle current of time that flows uninterrupted in the world of gods in stone. The courtyard garden hums quietly behind them, bees weaving lazy patterns between thyme blossoms and olive branches, their sound like a distant lullaby that echoes softly beneath the vaulted silence of the temple's inner sanctum. Inside, the stone floors remain cool beneath bare feet, and the air feels heavier now, thickened by the rising heat of the day and the slow accumulation of incense smoke, which curls in faint threads upward toward the open skylight above the altar. The midday ceremony has passed, but the tasks do not end. With the offerings now sorted, the attendant's next responsibility is the detailed cleansing of the sacred vessels, a task performed daily, with precision and reverence, in a small side chamber known only to the temple workers, a place where ritual tools are washed in spring water drawn from a sacred cistern built beneath the temple's foundations. The chamber is dim and smells of wet clay and old stone, the kind of earthy, grounding scent that seems to anchor the soul. The cistern's surface ripples faintly as the attendant lowers each vessel into its depths, careful not to let the items clink against each other, washing them with fingers instead of brushes, using small strips of linen that are later dried and burned so that no part of the process ever leaves the sacred circle. The water is cool, even in the heat of day, and it whispers quietly against the stone as it moves. Once each item is cleaned, it is laid out on a flat surface covered in pale cloth, where the sun, streaming in from a high window slit, slowly dries the metal and clay in perfect stillness. After the cleansing, the attendant takes a moment to light a small personal lamp in a recessed alcove, an act not required but often performed by those who serve within the temple, a way of offering a quiet prayer for clarity or strength, or simply peace. The flame flickers gently, casting a dance of light against the carved wall behind it, where scenes of old myths are etched into the surface. Heroes kneeling before gods, mortals lifting baskets of grain, children pouring libations with serious expressions. These are not stories of battles or dramatic transformations, but of service, of gratitude, of small, unnoticed acts of devotion that echo down through time, not as thunder, but as rain. Outside, the streets of the city are likely noisy and hot, filled with the chatter of markets and the cries of sellers, but here inside, time remains undisturbed. The attendant carries the dried vessels back to the storage shelves, arranging them precisely where they belong, aligning edges, checking for cracks, running a thumb gently across each surface with a kind of silent affection that comes only from years of familiarity. In the next hour, they will sweep the outer steps of the temple, picking up fallen petals, leaves, and the occasional small coin left behind by a hurried visitor. They will pause now and then to sip water, or to let their fingers trail over the rough texture of the stone columns cooled by centuries of weather and worn smooth in patches by hands just like theirs. They do not think much as they work, for there is nothing pressing to solve, no great decision to be made. Their mind drifts, tethered only lightly to the present, floating gently between the rhythm of movement and the hush of memory. They remember learning these tasks as a child, watching an older attendant perform them with the same care, the same calm, the same slow breath. They remember their first morning inside the temple, nervous, overwhelmed by the silence, unsure how to place their feet or fold the cloths or pour the oil without spilling. But now, years later, it is all second nature, and the temple feels less like a place of grandeur and more like a quiet, ever-patient companion. The light changes again, softening into late afternoon hues, and a faint breeze stirs through the doorway, carrying with it the mingled scents of roasted barley, ripening figs, and sun-warmed earth. The attendant breathes deeply and lets the scent pass through them like a memory. There will be a small evening ritual soon, nothing elaborate, just a lighting of lamps, a murmured blessing, a simple gesture of thanks for the day. Until then, there is time still, plenty of time, and the temple hums in its quiet way, holding everything within its ancient stones, the past and present together, wrapped in the slow, soothing fabric of devotion and dust. As the sun begins its long descent toward the horizon, and the shadows stretch across the courtyard like sleepy arms reaching outward from the base of each column, the temple itself seems to settle into a deeper kind of stillness, a quiet that is not absence but presence, a presence that the attendant has grown to recognize over the years as the breath of the sacred. With most of the daily tasks complete, there remains the gentle responsibility of preparing the interior spaces for the transition from day to evening, a process not rushed or dramatic but gradual, like the dimming of a flame or the soft pull of sleep over the eyes. The first step is the trimming and relighting of the oil lamps that line the inner sanctuary walls, each one nestled into a small carved niche, or placed carefully on stone stands that have stood unchanged since the time of their ancestors. The attendant moves slowly between them, using a small bronze tool to lift the blackened wicks and replace them with fresh fibers soaked lightly in olive oil. Each motion deliberate, each flicker of flame returned to life with a steady hand. The light is not bright. It is soft and golden, casting dancing shadows along the marble reliefs that decorate the walls, where gods and goddesses glide across stone in frozen procession. With the lamps lit, the room glows with a kind of interior sunset, warm and flickering like memory or candlelight seen through half-closed eyes. The attendant then moves to the altar one last time for the day, wiping its surface with a cloth moistened in rosewater and spring herbs, a quiet act of closure rather than ceremony, sealing the day's service with calm intention. Afterward, they unroll a thin mat made of reeds and place it near the far end of the sanctuary, not for rest but for meditation, a daily practice taught by the older priests, not as commandment, but as suggestion, a way to remain connected to the gods, even in stillness. Kneeling on the mat, the attendant closes their eyes, rests their hands in their lap, and lets their breath settle into rhythm with the deep silence of the temple. Thoughts drift in and out, but none stay for long. There is no prayer spoken aloud, no request made, only a slow awareness of space and quiet, of breath and stone, of time as something not to be conquered but accepted. Outside the temple walls, the city prepares for evening, the clatter of shutters being closed, the calls of merchants returning home, the brief cries of children at play fading into the hush of dusk. But here inside, that world feels distant, softened by the thick walls and ancient presence of divine watchfulness. When the meditation is complete, the attendant rises slowly and folds the mat back into its place, then walks once more to the cloister to check the herbs drying along the wall, sprigs of lavender and sage laid carefully across woven trays, left out to crisp in the sun for use in upcoming rituals. Some are ready, and the attendant gathers them with slow, precise movements, brushing away any dust and placing the herbs into clay jars labeled with careful inscriptions in the old script, used only within temple circles. Each jar is returned to its shelf in the preparation room, where the scent of herbs, oil, and stone mingles into a perfume so familiar it no longer registers as separate smells, but as the very fragrance of the temple itself. A young apprentice arrives quietly at the threshold, carrying a small clay tablet with a list of tomorrow's festival preparations. Simple duties, but important ones, for the gods must always be honored in full. The attendant reviews the tablet, nods, and returns it with a gesture of thanks, their voice low and even, never hurried. The apprentice bows and departs, and the moment passes like a ripple across still water, noticed, acknowledged, but quickly returned to calm. As the sun touches the edge of the world, staining the clouds in faint orange and purple, the final duty of the day begins. The lighting of the high altar flame, a single steady fire that will burn through the night, tended hourly by rotating temple servants. The attendant takes the torch prepared earlier, lights it from one of the wall lamps, and carries it in both hands toward the central flame bowl, its polished bronze surface reflecting the firelight like a pool of moving gold. With great care, they lower the flame into the bowl and step back as it catches. A small but steady fire that seems almost alive, its motion constant yet soothing, like the breath of the temple itself. The task complete, the attendant bows deeply to the statue of the god, holds the pose for a long, quiet moment, and then steps away, leaving the sanctuary bathed in flickering gold, silent except for the soft sound of the fire. Outside, the stars begin to appear one by one, and the temple is once again wrapped in peace and quiet, in the slow rhythm of sacred time that has no end, only continuation. As darkness gently folds itself across the city and the first stars scatter across the night sky like soft pinpricks in a woolen blanket, the temple begins its slow transformation into a world entirely separate from the waking bustle beyond its stone walls, a space suspended between shadow and stillness, watched over by oil lamps and quiet footsteps. The attendant, moving in near silence now, prepares for the final duties of the day with the same steady rhythm that has guided every task from morning until now, their body trained to carry out each motion with neither hesitation nor excess. The warm glow of the high altar flame continues to pulse softly in the center of the sanctuary, the fire burning steadily with a faint crackle that echoes just slightly against the vaulted ceilings, like the whispered breathing of a sleeping presence. Around it, the walls shimmer with shadows, long elongated forms of columns and statues that sway gently as the flames shift, giving the impression of a place halfway between earth and something older, something mythic and enduring. The attendant takes a small polished basin from a shelf in the eastern alcove and fills it from a covered urn containing water drawn at dawn, reserved all day for the final ritual of purification. This water, believed to hold the stillness of morning within it, is used only at night to anoint the thresholds of the temple, a tradition passed down for centuries, not written in books, but handed from one attendant to the next in soft-spoken instructions, always performed with reverence. Slowly, the attendant dips a sprig of olive into the basin and walks barefoot to each doorway, gently touching the water to the lintel and whispering a blessing for silence, for protection, for the preservation of peace through the long hours of night. There is no audience, no priest overseeing this moment. It is a solitary task, intimate and meditative, where even the breath feels like part of the ritual. Once all 4 thresholds are anointed, the attendant returns the bowl, now nearly empty, to its place, and takes a moment to sit once more beneath the cloister arches outside, where the night air has cooled, and the sound of distant waves from the city's edge drifts in like a lullaby. From here, they can see the outline of the temple roof against the stars, each tile catching just enough light to gleam faintly, while the small bronze bell above the entrance sways slightly in the breeze, though it never rings unless pulled by hand. This bell is rarely used, only during festivals or emergencies, but its quiet presence is comforting, a reminder that the temple stands watch even when no one calls. The attendant leans back against the stone wall, feeling the coolness seep into their spine, and lets their gaze soften, not looking for anything, just observing the space that is both sacred and familiar. Occasionally a bird stirs in the rafters above, or a small insect hums by in the dark, but otherwise the moment is complete in its quiet. After some time they rise and make their final rounds, checking the storage alcoves to ensure no lamp. Oil is left uncapped, no cloth unrolled, no herb jar exposed to air or moisture. The order must be maintained, not because someone will check, but because order is the foundation of this life, its rhythm, its comfort, its prayer. Back in the sanctuary, they kneel briefly before the god statue, not to speak or ask, but simply to acknowledge, to be present, to feel the quiet weight of devotion that has settled over the space like a soft, unshakable blanket. The statue, a towering figure of carved marble or painted wood, depending on the temple's age and resources, watches over the space with eyes that do not blink, a posture that does not change, and yet it feels alive in the firelight, as if the very act of centuries of worship has given it a kind of quiet awareness. The attendant bows again, then steps back, leaving the sanctuary with its lamps and shadows and soft golden breath. Outside, the sky has grown darker still, the stars sharper, the moon now high enough to cast its own soft light across the courtyard flagstones. The attendant walks to their small living quarters, a plain room tucked behind the temple walls, where a cot, a basin, and a few personal items await: an old scroll, a worn comb, a folded tunic for mourning. There is no rush to sleep, for there is nothing tomorrow that has not been done today, and nothing yesterday that lingers with weight. This life, simple and unchanging, offers no grand tales, no climaxes or falls, but it offers a rare thing, a continuous flow of quiet, of tasks that matter only because they are done with care, of a day shaped entirely by attentiveness and the passage of sun to moon. And so, the attendant lies down on the cot, listening to the last faint echo of footsteps softening in the corridor, the temple now behind them wrapped in firelight and cool night air, and closes their eyes, not with a sigh or a word, but with the calm certainty that tomorrow will unfold just as slowly, just as quietly, in the never-ending cycle of devotion and dust, of stone and silence. The morning returns slowly, quietly, as it always does. Not with brilliance or haste, but with a gentle light that begins to slip through the cracks of shuttered windows and across the tops of faded walls, brushing over the surfaces of woven mats and clay basins, casting soft gray patterns onto the worn stone floor of the attendant's chamber. The sounds that come with this light are equally subdued. The whisper of wind through olive trees, the distant cooing of doves nesting in the temple's eaves, and the soft creak of the wooden door frame expanding in the warming air. The attendant awakens not to a bell or a summons, but to the natural rhythm of this ancient place, rising slowly and stretching limbs that have known the exact same posture every morning for years. There is no rush, for the day ahead will unfold like all the others, measured, sacred, deliberate. They dress in a clean linen tunic, still smelling faintly of soap-root and sun, and tie the familiar sash around their waist, the color slightly more faded now, but still clearly marking their station. The cool basin water is splashed onto their face, shocking for only a second before it gives way to a comfortable freshness that prepares them to step into the still world of the temple again. Before leaving their chamber, they light a small handheld lamp with the previous night's coals, watching it catch with a soft hiss, and carry it carefully into the inner corridor, where shadows still cling to the ceiling arches and the faintest dew has crept along the joints between stones. Their feet pad silently along the stone path leading toward the sanctuary, where the first task awaits, extinguishing the sacred flame, but only after offering a whispered prayer of thanks to the deity whose presence it symbolized all night. The attendant bows deeply, lets the silence linger, then gently covers the flame bowl with a curved lid, letting the smoke rise in lazy spirals as the fire withdraws into stillness. With that act complete, the new day has begun within the temple. The attendant returns to the storerooms to gather the items needed for the morning blessing: the polished bronze lamp holders, the offering tray with 3 small clay bowls, and a slender strip of pressed beeswax, which will be melted down later to seal the prayer scrolls stored deep in the records chamber. Each item is checked for dust, for cracks, for signs of misuse, though such flaws are rare, as each servant treats every object with quiet reverence. With items in hand, the attendant moves to the cleansing basin in the outer courtyard, where a small group of apprentices are already filling jars with spring water, their chatter hushed but warm, like birds settling on a ledge. The attendant does not scold or rush them. Instead, they nod with approval at the apprentices' progress and set their own items nearby, waiting patiently for their turn at the water spout. Once filled, the bowl is cradled gently in their hands and brought to the altar, where the morning's first offering will soon take place. As sunlight grows stronger, golden now and low, it begins to pierce through the slits high in the temple's roof, illuminating the central figure of the deity and casting a beam across the floor that has marked morning for generations. No sundial is needed here, only the light which lands precisely between 2 carved lions on the floor mosaic at the same moment each day, signaling the beginning of the morning prayer. The attendant stands alone at the altar now, the apprentices dismissed for other tasks, and begins the prayer with a deep inhale, speaking the sacred words not with volume, but with clarity and care, each syllable resonating through the space like a bell tone in water. The ritual is brief, meant to open the day rather than command it, but every gesture is performed with intention. The water sprinkled in a 3-fold pattern, the oil dropped carefully into the flame, the small loaf of barley bread placed on the altar stone with both hands. When the ritual concludes, the attendant steps back, bows once more, and allows the silence to close around them. The rest of the day will bring its usual cycle: tidying, preparing, attending the needs of those who come with offerings or petitions. But this morning moment, held between darkness and the full brightness of day, is theirs alone. As they walk slowly to the cloister for a moment of breath and reflection, The warmth of the sun begins to settle on the stone benches, and a slight breeze carries the scent of lemon balm and wild thyme from the garden beyond the walls. The attendant sits for just a while, hands resting gently in their lap, eyes half-lidded, simply listening. To the flutter of bird wings, to the distant sound of sandals against the temple's outer steps, to the breath of the world turning, once again into light. And in this pause, which is neither long nor short, they feel the peace that comes not from rest or escape, but from routine, from devotion, from the quiet repetition of days that do not demand attention, only presence. With the morning rites now completed and the early light grown stronger, spilling into every corner of the temple and warming the worn stones beneath the attendants' feet, the slow rhythm of the day begins to unfold into its familiar pattern of quiet tasks and gentle purpose, each action guided not by orders or urgency, but by the soft weight of tradition. The sanctuary remains silent, its high ceilings capturing the occasional echo of distant footsteps or the clink of bronze against marble, but mostly it is filled with a kind of sacred hush, a silence that has learned to hold sound instead of rejecting it, allowing only the calmest tones to exist within its borders. The attendant walks through the nave, a long linen cloth draped over one arm, stopping at each of the statues that line the inner passage, representations of lesser-known deities, nymphs, or personified virtues like harmony, discipline, and mercy, each figure carved with care, weathered by centuries, and attended to with daily offerings of petals, soft words, or quiet dusting. One by one, the attendant wipes away the faint film of time that collects on each face, their fingers tracing the carved outlines not with interest, but with the slow respect of someone who has done this countless times before, knowing every curve and crevice not by study, but by memory of touch. At the base of each statue is a small alcove where visitors leave offerings. Simple things like pine cones, smooth pebbles, wax figurines, and occasionally notes written in small, curled handwriting folded neatly or tied with a string. The attendant does not read them, of course. They are not meant for mortal eyes, but are treated with the same respect as if spoken directly to the gods. They gather the more fragile offerings, those made of paper or organic material, and gently carry them to the offering pit behind the temple's east wall, a quiet shaded place enclosed by stone where the remains of countless years of devotion are buried layer by layer beneath olive branches and pressed ash. This act, too, is done without ceremony, yet it holds its own quiet ritual weight, and the attendant always says a short line as they place the offerings within the earth. What is given remains, even unseen. No one instructed them to say this. It is a phrase passed from one attendant to the next, whispered at the threshold between duty and belief. After returning from the offering pit, the attendant stops briefly to help the gardener, an elderly temple worker who rarely speaks but always smiles, their face crinkling into deep lines as they tend the rows of herbs and sacred plants lining the temple courtyard. The soil is dry today, and the attendant helps draw water from the cistern with a grooved wooden bucket, pouring it slowly along the base of the myrtle bushes and lavender rows, careful not to soak the roots too heavily. The smell of wet earth rises warmly into the air, mingling with the distant scent of fig sap and the gentle heat radiating from the white walls that have soaked in morning light. Afterward, they return to the main preparation chamber, where they roll fresh strips of cloth to be used in purification rituals, their fingers working methodically, folding, pressing, tying with twine, repeating the same motion again and again until the entire basket is filled. There is a kind of comfort in this repetition, in the way the cloth forms a neat pile, in the rustling sound it makes as it is set down, in the light dust it stirs as it shifts gently with every touch. Occasionally, voices float in from beyond, the gate, visitors speaking in quiet tones, an acolyte instructing a newcomer, or the simple call of someone greeting a passerby. But inside, within the temple walls, all remains as it always is, unchanged, deliberate, soft. The attendant pauses at the doorway to the inner sanctum before entering again, standing still for a long moment, breathing in the warm, dry air of the room where the god statue resides, where the sun now rests in a perfect square of gold. across the floor, highlighting the grain in the ancient stone. They walk forward slowly, each step placed with the same care as the last, not because they fear misstep, but because reverence is not a performance, it is a practice. They place the fresh cloth near the altar, set the basket of herbs beside. The lamp adjusts the position of a small urn so its shadow no longer touches the base of the offering bowl. And then, having completed these quiet calibrations, they step back once more into the stillness, listening, not for a voice, not for instruction, but simply for the sound of silence in a room that has heard so many prayers, so many footsteps, so many breaths over the centuries. And in that moment, they feel no pride and no boredom, only presence. The strange peace of knowing that this moment, like all others in the temple, belongs not to them, but to the slow, unhurried rhythm of sacred time that continues without need for acknowledgement, praise, or change. With the midday sun now climbing high above the tiled roof of the temple, casting straight beams of golden heat into the courtyard where pale dust dances gently in the light breeze, the attendant prepares for one of the lesser but still necessary tasks that arrive each day like clockwork, inspecting the temple's perimeter walkways for small signs of wear, weathering, or stray clutter that might have blown in from the city beyond the outer gate. This duty, though mundane, is given just as much attention as the ritual acts performed before the altar, for the gods are believed to inhabit all corners of the temple space, not only the inner sanctum. The perimeter walls, made of thick white limestone with faint veins of rose-colored mineral, rise steadily around the complex, broken only by vine-covered trellises and small alcoves where carved inscriptions retell myths or honor former high priests and priestesses. As the attendant walks slowly along the outer edge of the temple courtyard, their fingers brush lightly against the stone walls, feeling the texture that changes subtly between sun-warmed panels and shaded cooler patches. Occasionally, they pause to pick up a twig or a fallen olive leaf, or to straighten the small clay boundary markers that are placed at intervals in the gravel path. Little cones of terracotta, etched with protective symbols that are easily disturbed by birds or weather. Near the northeastern corner where the wall curves slightly around a cluster of laurel trees, they find a spot where the plaster has begun to chip, exposing the raw stone beneath. They make a quiet note of it on a wax tablet carried for such purposes. Not to scold, not to rush, but simply to ensure it is addressed in time, as all things are, according to the temple's steady rhythm. Further along the wall, the path leads to a low archway that opens into a rarely used side garden, once used by the high priest for personal contemplation, now mostly quiet, overgrown with thyme and violets. The stone bench in its center worn smooth from years of use and weather. The attendant steps inside, ducking slightly beneath the arch, and stands still for a moment in the shaded quiet, listening to the rustle of leaves and the distant chirping of cicadas from beyond the walls. A small fountain in the corner, shaped like a lion's head, releases a gentle stream of water into a shallow basin, its sound soft and rhythmic, like a slow heartbeat. Though there is no requirement to remain here, the attendant allows themselves a short pause, settling onto the bench with a faint sigh. Not of weariness, but of recognition, as if their body understands this exact place and moment, has sat in this posture 100 times before. The sun, filtered through the thick leaves above, flickers gently across the ground, and the air smells of warmed stone, green herbs, and the faint metallic hint of water. It is in this forgotten garden, not the grand sanctuary, where the attendant often feels the most connected to the gods, not because of grandeur or ritual, but because of the perfect simplicity of the moment. Water, stone, sun, and the steady breath of someone who belongs exactly where they are. After several minutes, they rise once more, brushing stray petals from their tunic, and resume the inspection, passing by the storage rooms, the outer kitchens, and the covered walkway that leads to the apprentice quarters, noting small details. An unlatched shutter, a crooked amphora, a section of chipped tile. Each observation not a burden, but part of the slow, unending care that keeps the temple breathing. Before returning to the main courtyard, they stop to check the grain stores, located beneath a shaded colonnade. Inside, the air is cooler, dry, and carries the comforting scent of dried barley and woven baskets. Here, sacks of grain are stored, for both offerings and daily temple use, and it is the attendant's job to rotate them slowly, always ensuring that nothing is left too long in the same place, preventing spoilage and symbolizing the principle of balance, that nothing should grow stagnant even in stillness. They move the sacks with practiced ease, lifting, adjusting, brushing away dust, and checking for signs of insects or damp. Everything seems in order, and they record this on the wax tablet as well, pressing the stylus carefully to avoid smudging. Earlier notes. Emerging again into the sunlight, the attendant stands at the edge of the colonnade and watches as the city beyond the temple walls continues its own rhythm, faster, louder, and more unpredictable than the calm world they inhabit, yet somehow distant, like the sound of waves against a harbor wall heard only faintly from inland. They do not envy that world nor reject it. They simply observe it, knowing that their place lies here within these worn, sunlit stones, in the unbroken thread of quiet acts that stretch from sunrise to nightfall, from breath to breath, from the present to the stories carved in the walls around them. The day continues not with fanfare or disruption, but with more of the same. And in that sameness lies the very heartbeat of the temple, a heartbeat that is felt in every slow, thoughtful step the attendant takes along the gravel path, beneath the endless sky. As the sun moves gradually toward its descent and the temple grounds settle into the hushed warmth of late afternoon, the attendant finds themselves returning once again to the central preparation room, where the faint scent of olive oil and aged parchment lingers like a quiet memory in the air, and where tasks await that are neither urgent nor dramatic but necessary in their own gentle way. The light entering the windows at this hour slants in from a lower angle, striking the tops of shelves and catching on the edges of bronze bowls and terracotta jars, creating halos of brightness that shift with the movement of time itself. The attendant's next responsibility is to assist in the inventory and gentle maintenance of the temple scrolls. Records of offerings, names of pilgrims, calendar marks for past and future rituals, and the preserved prayers from generations of previous priests carefully inked onto narrow lengths of papyrus rolled tightly and stored in clay tubes for protection. The scroll chamber is a narrow, cool room carved into the thickest part of the temple wall, far from heat and moisture, its entrance framed by two unadorned columns and a lintel carved only with the word Nim, memory, as if the entire room exists solely to remember. Inside, the attendant moves carefully, feet brushing across the reed mats laid down long ago to soften the stone floor, each step bringing the faint sound of fibers shifting beneath their weight. The scrolls are stored horizontally, arranged by moon cycle and year, with special symbols on the outer clay tubes to indicate the nature of their contents, symbols that the attendant has long since memorized without effort, having studied and sorted these same items month after month in unchanging order. With a soft cloth, they dust each scroll tube gently, checking for any sign of mildew or wear, and replace the sealing wax on those that have cracked, using a warm brass spoon to melt a fresh droplet of beeswax and press it over the seam, then marking it again with the temple's sigil using a small wooden stamp. This work, though quiet and repetitious, has a kind of sacred gravity to it, for to lose a scroll would be to lose part of the temple's living memory, and so every detail is handled with attentive care, even though the room itself is rarely visited by anyone but temple staff. As they work, the light shifts once more, growing dimmer, cooler and more blue at the edges, and the shadows grow long and familiar on the walls, like the faces of old friends returning. Once the scroll maintenance is complete, the attendant carries a small selection of newly inscribed prayer scrolls, written earlier by a junior priest and left for final sealing, to the altar chamber. There they place the scrolls in a bronze chest tucked beneath a carved niche in the eastern wall, the spot reserved for prayers not meant for public reading but kept safe and near the divine. After closing the chest with a quiet click of its latch, the attendant lingers for a moment, letting the stillness wrap around them like a second skin, breathing in the air that smells of oil, stone, and distant herbs. They then step out into the courtyard again, where the shadows of the columns now stretch across the paving stones in graceful arcs, and the sky above has softened into a pale gold, tinged with early signs of evening's arrival. Across the garden, a group of apprentices kneel in the dirt near the herb beds, gently pruning sprigs of rosemary and mint, beneath the instruction of a senior healer. Their voices hushed, their gestures slow. The attendant watches for a moment, not intervening, simply observing the continuity of practice passed from hand to hand, the way tradition flows forward without fanfare. A small bell rings once, clear, high, and brief, signaling the approach of a visitor, and the attendant walks slowly to the outer gate to greet them. It is an older woman, cloaked and walking with the aid of a polished staff, who carries with her a small basket wrapped in linen. She speaks softly, requesting that an offering be placed in memory of her husband, who passed one season ago and was once a servant of this very temple. The attendant nods, taking the basket with both hands and bowing slightly before leading her to the shaded side altar, where such offerings are received. The woman unwraps the linen, revealing a small jar of honey, a folded strip of woven cloth, and a cluster of dried dates, each item chosen with quiet care, holding meaning only the gods and she understand. The attendant arranges the offering on the stone, murmurs the appropriate words of dedication, and bows with her before letting the moment pass, untouched by explanation or interruption. As the woman leaves, the attendant remains, adding a pinch of barley beside the offering as custom dictates, then returns once again to their usual path, circling back through the colonnade with footsteps that make no sound louder than the whisper of a robe against stone. The day continues, drifting ever closer to evening, and the temple breathes slowly with the rhythm of sun and shadow, of ritual and record, of memory and silence. As the day edges quietly toward evening and the warm golden tones of late sunlight begin to mellow into amber, the temple grounds are bathed in a gentle stillness that feels earned, a hush that comes not from emptiness, but from the culmination of another day lived in slow devotion. The attendant, moving through the long colonnade on the western side of the temple, carries a small wooden tray with care. On it rests a bronze incense burner shaped like a curled dolphin, its tail arched and its mouth open to release the steady stream of fragrant smoke that will be used to gently cleanse the prayer stones scattered throughout the sacred grove behind the temple. This grove, a hidden garden of soft grasses and weathered olive trees, is perhaps the least visited but most quietly powerful place in the temple's domain. It is accessed by a narrow gate carved into the far wall, unmarked but known to all who serve, and the path leading into it is made of small flat stones laid centuries ago in no particular pattern, worn smooth by the soles of those who walked here before. As the attendant enters, the air changes subtly. It cools, softens, and takes on the scent of myrtle and sun-warmed bark, mixed now with the wafting tendrils of the burning incense, which rises in lazy spirals, catching the light as it floats upward and disappears into the leaves. The grove is silent save for the rustle of trees and the distant hum of bees returning to their hives, and scattered throughout are small stones laid in curved rows, each etched with the simplest of markings, some bearing only names, some symbols, some left entirely blank. These are not graves, but memory markers placed by worshippers over the years to commemorate moments, prayers, or loved ones, each one infused with its own quiet story, known only to the one who placed it. The attendant begins their circuit of the grove slowly, pausing at each stone to wave the incense burner gently back and forth in a half-circle motion, allowing the smoke to settle briefly before moving on. They do not speak or chant. They simply breathe, watching the way the smoke lingers in the low branches before dissipating into the air. Occasionally, they bend to remove a stray twig or place a fresh sprig of laurel atop a marker that seems to ask for attention, not by any sign, but by some inner sense of care cultivated over years of service. The grove, in return, offers its calm like a gift, unchanging, peaceful, untouched by the outer world. At the center of the grove stands a simple stone column, cracked slightly near its base, draped in vines and bearing no name, only a carved line that reads, "To that which passes and that which remains." The attendant stands before it for a moment, allowing the incense to drift upward, offering no words, no gestures, only stillness, which in this place is enough. As they complete the final turn around the grove, the sun lowers further behind the hills, and the shadows grow longer, cooler, softer. The tray now empty, the burner cool, the attendant exits the grove with the same care as when they entered, closing the gate quietly behind them and returning through the narrow passage to the main compound. There, the courtyard glows with the last light of day, and the apprentices begin to light the low perimeter lamps, their soft orange flames flickering to life one by one, each wick catching the fading glow of the sky and reflecting it back in miniature. The attendant nods to them in passing, approving silently, and continues toward the interior sanctuary where preparations for the evening devotion will soon begin. But before entering, they take a moment at the fountain basin to wash their hands and face, cupping the water in both palms and letting it run down slowly, feeling the coolness refresh not just the skin but the mind, the breath, the spirit, the flow of water, the crackle of lamps, the scent of distant herbs, and the slow rhythm of footfalls in the temple halls all combine into a single quiet song, a hymn of order, of patience, of peace. The temple has not changed, and will not change, and in that unchanging rhythm lies the beauty that so often eludes the louder stories of heroes and wars. Here, in the world of slow movements and repeated gestures, life becomes not a tale of conquest but of presence, and the attendant, returning the empty tray to its shelf and smoothing their tunic with practiced ease, steps back into that presence, without question, ready for whatever small sacred tasks remain before the stars appear in full. With evening now gently falling across the temple, and the last golden hues of sunlight retreating behind the distant hills, a new kind of quiet settles over the sacred grounds, not the bright stillness of morning, or the industrious silence of midday, but a deeper, softer hush, as if the temple itself has begun to breathe more slowly, preparing for the long, steady rhythm of night. The temple attendant, whose day has unfolded like a scroll unrolled with care, now prepares for the final formal ritual of the day, the lighting of the night lamps and the offering of the twilight hymn, an act that is more of gesture than spectacle, more about rhythm than performance. In the sanctuary, shadows move gently across the floor, like soft cloths being drawn from one side of the room to the other, and the lamps, small bowls of oil with carefully trimmed wicks, are arranged in a semicircle around the statue of the deity, their bases polished and their flames waiting to be kindled. The attendant works methodically, bending at the knees, touching each lamp as if it were alive, pouring oil slowly so that it pools evenly, placing a single dried bay leaf at the base of each in accordance with an old tradition said to invite protection during the night. When all is ready, they use a single taper, lit from the central flame kept alive since sunset, to bring each lamp to life. One by one, small flames leap into being, trembling for a moment before steadying into warm, flickering light, casting long, golden shadows onto the temple walls, where carved figures of gods, animals, and mythical scenes seem to shift, ever so, slightly with each movement of the flame. The attendant steps back, observing the symmetry of the lights, ensuring each one is balanced in brightness and spacing, then kneels before the altar and places both hands palm down on the cool stone floor, bowing their head and beginning the twilight hymn, not sung but recited slowly, rhythmically, in the old dialect preserved only for ritual, the words falling like drops into still water, each syllable stretching into the next with no sharpness or haste. The hymn itself is simple, unchanging, a slow prayer for continuity, peace, and the safe passage of night. No dramatic invocations, no thunderous cries, just the calm repetition of lines known by heart and whispered by countless others through centuries. When the final line is spoken, the attendant remains kneeling for a few moments more, not out of obligation but from a practiced stillness, letting the breath of the space settle once again, letting the light of the lamps take full hold. Then, slowly they rise and return to their feet, walking the perimeter of the sanctuary with deliberate steps, checking each corner for signs of disturbance, fallen petals, shifted objects, a curtain moved slightly by the breeze. Everything is in place. The order has been preserved, the space is whole. Before exiting, they pass by the base of the god statue and place a single olive branch on the steps, a small nightly offering symbolic of continuity and peace. The same gesture performed every evening, unchanged, unremarkable, and deeply meaningful. Outside the sanctuary, the temple grounds have grown darker now, though the perimeter lamps glow gently, giving shape to the courtyard paths and illuminating the soft edges of benches, planters, and stone arches. A few apprentices linger near the kitchen, their duties done, speaking in quiet tones as they share a small bowl of lentils by lamplight, their laughter subdued and warm. The attendant nods to them in passing, not interrupting, simply acknowledging their presence with a slight tilt of the head. The world beyond the temple walls is mostly still now, save for the occasional sound of hooves on stone streets or the bark of a dog in some distant alleyway. But here, within the sacred compound, everything has slowed to a near standstill, the only remaining motion being that of the wind in the olive branches and the soft shifting of firelight across the white walls. As the attendant walks the outer corridor once more, their fingers trail gently across the stone, not out of thought but habit, years of tracing the same route, touching the same surface, grounded by the very texture of their world. There are no surprises here, no alarms or sudden changes, only the steady, sacred cycle of light to dark, day to night, and within that cycle, the life of the attendant flows like a gentle stream, uninterrupted, unseen, and endlessly still. As the night deepens and the stars overhead multiply, filling the sky with a quiet shimmer like powdered marble dust scattered across deep indigo silk, the temple enters its most serene state, a space no longer shaped by footsteps or chants, but by pure stillness, illuminated only by the soft flicker of oil lamps and the distant silvery light of the rising moon. The temple attendant, whose body now carries the gentle fatigue of a full day's motion, returns to one of the smaller ancillary chambers, an inner room used not for worship, but for quiet reflection and occasional study, known among the temple staff as the room of breath, for within its simple stone walls the silence is so complete that one's own breathing seems louder than sound itself. The chamber contains only the most modest furnishings, a low bench carved from olive wood, a woven mat in the corner for sitting or kneeling, a narrow shelf holding a few scrolls of collected wisdom, some containing prayers, others simply reflections, written by former attendants or elder priests over the years. The attendant enters, setting aside their sandals and carrying with them a small hand-sized clay lamp filled with fresh oil. Lighting it from the taper kept in a holder just outside the door, they place it in the center of the bench, its small flame casting a golden ring of light that softens the corners of the room and brings the inscriptions on the wall into faint relief. These inscriptions, etched in calm script directly into the stone, are simple. Phrases like, "Be as steady as the sun," "Do not chase the silence, walk beside it," and "What is clean will stay clean if touched gently." These sayings are not commandments but reminders, quiet companions to the long hours of solitary service that define the attendant's life. Tonight, the attendant chooses not to read, not to write, but simply to sit, settling into the mat with their legs folded beneath them, hands resting lightly on their thighs, and their gaze fixed loosely on the steady little flame. The world. Beyond this moment, bustling markets, tales of gods and monsters, even the subtle dramas of temple staff, is distant, a low murmur on the edges of awareness. What fills the space now is breath, warmth, stillness, and the feeling of being exactly where one belongs. The minutes pass without urgency. The body relaxes, the shoulders fall, and the chest rises and falls in slow, unforced rhythm. Occasionally, the lamp flickers with a faint gust from a hidden crack in the stone wall, but the flame always finds its center again, just as the attendant, with closed eyes, gently brings wandering thoughts back to the stillness of the room. There is no goal here, no spiritual breakthrough expected, just the simple act of sitting, of being, of letting the weight of the day dissolve like salt in warm water. After what could be a long stretch or a short one, time does not move quickly in this place. The attendant opens their eyes, stands slowly, stretches their arms with a quiet sigh, and carefully extinguishes the lamp, pressing a small piece of damp cloth over the flame and watching it fade into a spiral of thin smoke that drifts upward and disappears into the dark. The room, now returned to shadow, feels no emptier, only quieter, as if it too had exhaled. The attendant slips back into their sandals and walks the short hallway that leads toward the inner living quarters, where other attendants rest in simple rooms like their own, each one marked only by a different carved symbol on the doorframe: a circle, a leaf, a wave, a flame. Their own door bears the image of a gently curved feather, a symbol they chose upon entering their full role, signifying lightness, quiet, and balance. Inside, their room is as it always is: clean, spare, welcoming in its austerity. A folded blanket lies atop the cot. A clean tunic for tomorrow hangs on a wooden peg, and beside the low window, a small bowl of dried lavender releases a faint, calming scent. The attendant undresses slowly, folding the day's robe and placing it in the laundry basket for the apprentices to collect in the morning. They lie down without a sound, back resting on the familiar softness of the woven mattress, arms settling gently at their sides. Through the narrow window, the stars are visible, clear and unblinking, and the moon has risen high enough to cast a faint glow on the floor. No lamp is needed now. The temple sleeps, but even in its sleep it watches, and holds a place untouched by chaos where each day, each night, follows the same gentle script. And as the attendants' breathing deepens and their thoughts drift into the soft haze of dreams, the temple breathes with them, ancient and unchanged, a silent witness to another day completed in the service of peace, repetition, and the quiet holiness of simplicity. The night continues its silent passage above the temple, where the stars, unmoving to the eye but ancient in their patience, cast their pale light across the rooftops, illuminating the tiles in soft silver and bathing the high outer walls in a gentle ethereal glow. Within the quiet interior of the temple complex, where no voices rise and no hurried footsteps echo, the very air seems to rest, carrying only the faintest scent of old incense and warm stone. The temple attendant sleeps soundly in their modest chamber, wrapped loosely in a linen blanket that smells of lavender and sun-dried cloth, their breathing slow and steady, synchronized with the still rhythm of the sacred grounds around them. But not all rest in this hour. One of the temple's nocturnal responsibilities includes the scheduled tending of the ever-burning flame that sits in the sanctuary's heart. And tonight, it falls to the attendant to fulfill this quiet duty. Their shift does not begin with a jarring bell or loud command, but with a gentle tap at the door from another servant, a touch so soft it could be mistaken for the sound of wind on wood. The attendant stirs without groaning, without hesitation, accustomed to this moment as they are to all others. Rising with quiet limbs and careful breath, they dress in the soft inner robe used for night rituals, pale gray and unadorned, its texture smooth and light so as not to disturb the sleeping halls. A single lamp is lit, cradled in one hand, and they step into the corridor where cool air wraps around bare arms and the silence becomes more profound than ever. The walk to the sanctuary feels longer at night, not because of distance but because the world is more hushed. Every step becomes a sound, every movement and action performed in the presence of the gods and the moon. Upon reaching the entrance, to the sacred chamber they bow, even though no eyes watch, and enter the flickering light of the main altar room, where the eternal flame still burns gently in the polished bronze brazier, casting its dance of shadows across the engraved walls and tiled floor. The room is warm here, not hot, but softly radiant with the life of the flame, which crackles faintly and emits a scent of aged olive oil and charred bay leaves. The attendant moves with slow reverence, kneeling beside the brazier, using the long-handled bronze ladle to pour a measured amount of fresh oil into the flame's basin, watching as the fire accepts it, flaring slightly before settling once more into its steady glow. This moment is not ceremonial, but it is sacred, one of the many unseen acts that sustain the rhythm of the temple, as crucial in its quiet way as any grand ritual or spoken hymn. Once the flame is tended, the attendant takes a moment to sit beside it on the low stone bench built into the wall, letting the warmth seep into their limbs, letting their minds settle into the deep, slow silence that belongs only to night. Around them, the figures of the carved deities seem softer, gentler in the low light, their eyes less stern, their poses more patient. The statue of the god, towering above the brazier, gleams faintly in the firelight, its features almost unreadable in the shadows, yet still somehow comforting in its watchful presence. No words are spoken, none are needed. After a long, still while, long enough for the flame to burn steady and the oil to settle, the attendant stands again, checks the wick's position, straightens the nearby offerings, and quietly exits the sanctuary, bowing once more before stepping into the corridor, where the lamp they carry seems brighter now against the deeper darkness of the outer halls. Their path back to the chamber is the same as before, yet each step feels slower, not out of weariness but out of care. A continuation of the sacred pause, the unbroken line of calm that runs through each hour of temple life, even in sleep. Upon returning to their room, the attendant places the lamp gently on the ledge, removes their robe with practiced quiet, folds it with care, and lies down once more. The blanket pulled lightly over their body carries the lingering scent of olive and herbs, and the cool touch of the stone wall beside the cot is familiar, grounding. Outside the window, the stars are still shining. Nothing has changed. And yet everything feels whole, complete in its rhythm, its stillness, its silence. The temple breathes on, and the attendant, wrapped once again in the embrace of sacred routine, lets go of the waking world and drifts gently back into sleep, where even dreams move slowly like petals drifting down onto calm water beneath a moonlit sky. As the final quarter of the night slowly unfolds and the moon begins its graceful descent toward the western horizon, casting elongated shadows across the quiet temple grounds, there is a subtle shift in the atmosphere, one so gentle it would be missed by anyone not attuned to the sacred rhythm of this place. But the temple attendant, even in their light sleep, seems to sense it, stirring only slightly as the ambient silence of the night begins its gradual transformation into the earliest breath of dawn. The room remains wrapped in a cool hush, the stars still visible through the narrow window. But the air now carries with it the faintest chill, a sign that the warmth of the day is preparing to return. The attendant opens their eyes not with effort or resistance, but with the kind of quiet acceptance that comes from countless mornings beginning in the same fashion. They lie still for a few extra moments, listening to the stillness, feeling the way their body rests against the woven mat, the way the blanket lies across their chest, the way the world, even in darkness, feels ordered and calm. Slowly they rise, stretching their arms toward the ceiling with slow, deliberate movement, then placing their feet on the stone floor, which is cool but not harsh. They wash with water from the clay basin beside the cot, its surface still from the night before, then don a fresh tunic. This one light beige, simple and unmarked, perfect for the first temple round of the new day. Before leaving their quarters, the attendant lights the small wall-mounted lamp with practiced ease and pauses to gather the day's first duty scroll, a flat clay tablet that had been quietly slipped beneath the door during the night. It contains nothing new, only the same set of responsibilities rotated through the cycle of temple life. But even this small ritual of collection and review holds meaning, a tether to the endless, anchoring routine of their sacred role. As they step outside into the open corridor, the lamps flicker slightly in the soft breeze, and the pale pre-dawn sky begins to show the faintest hues of violet and ash gray just above the treetops. The temple feels half asleep but alive, as if it too is preparing to stretch and breathe deeply before waking fully. The attendant walks the familiar route to the cleansing spring, where each day begins with the ceremonial drawing of water that will be used in that morning's purification rituals. The spring itself lies in a small walled garden near the temple's rear, surrounded by thick stone walls and shaded by drooping fig branches that barely move in the still air. Birds have not yet begun to sing, but somewhere in the distance, the first faint hoot of a waking owl fades into the background. The water in the spring glows faintly with reflected moonlight as the attendant lowers the vessel slowly, watching the ripples spread outward like soft breath. Once the vessel is full, they cradle it with both hands and return along the curved path through the herb courtyard, where the plants are still soaked in dew, their leaves shining softly in the low light. No words are spoken, none are needed. The tasks of the morning will begin soon, lighting the outer torches, preparing the offering trays, sweeping the floor beneath the altar where fine dust settles even when no wind seems to move. But for now there is this moment, the hush before the chant, the pause before the sun. The attendant enters the main hall just as the first lines of sunlight begin to spill across the floor, tracing familiar shapes through the columns, golden, fingers stretching quietly toward the altar as if reaching back from yesterday. They pause at the threshold as they do every morning to bow their head in silence, not as a requirement, but as a habit that brings comfort, anchoring them to the invisible thread of every other morning, just like this one. Inside, the eternal flame glows faintly, needing only the smallest addition of oil to renew its strength, and the attendant moves forward without a sound, carefully opening the sealed jar and pouring a slow stream into the flame's basin, watching as the light brightens slightly, breathing back to full life. This flame, unchanged and unchanging, feels like a heartbeat, one they know will continue long after they are gone, just as it burned long before they arrived. The attendant steps back, clasps their hands before them, and stands still, allowing the stillness to envelop them one last time before the day begins in full, before apprentices appear with questions and scrolls, before pilgrims arrive with soft offerings and hushed voices, before the quiet temple becomes once again a place of silent but steady motion. In this fragile hour between the worlds of night and day, there is only presence, no ambition, no regret, just the quiet simplicity of being exactly where one is meant to be. The sky begins to brighten now, the stars fading slowly, and the temple breathes in the new day with the same calm it has known for centuries, wrapped in routine, held in stone, and guarded by the footsteps of those who serve it with quiet hearts. With the full light of dawn now filtering through the highest openings of the temple roof and cascading down in gentle shafts of gold upon the stone floors, the temple begins to stir, not with urgency or bustle, but with the quiet, gradual return of motion, like leaves rustling after a still night or the soft rippling of a calm pool when touched by the first breath of wind. The temple attendant, already deep into the first cycle of morning duties, carries a basket of fresh linen cloths through the colonnade, each one folded precisely and scented lightly with rosemary and lemon balm, prepared the day before and now warmed faintly by the rising sun. These cloths are used in countless ways, for wiping down ritual vessels, for wrapping small offerings, for drying the stone benches after the nightly dew, and even for anointing the brows of those who come seeking quiet solace in the shade of the temple's inner chambers. The attendant places the basket beside the preparation table in the eastern wing of the sanctuary, where a shaft of morning light stretches in like an invitation across the smooth surface, making the polished bronze bowls glint and the clay cups seem almost translucent. They begin their work slowly, methodically, wiping each object with care, checking for the smallest flaw, a chip, a spot of residue, a crack barely visible to the untrained eye. There is no hurry in this work, no pressure, only the calm satisfaction of keeping the temple world in balance. Once finished, the items are placed on open shelves, ordered by use, by size, by age, each vessel having its place, its story, and its quiet history. After this, the attendant turns to the prayer alcove, a small space carved into the far corner of the temple, away from the main altar, reserved for private reflection, and often overlooked by visitors who are drawn to the more dramatic, open spaces. Here the walls are etched with lines of poetry, old, worn, and difficult to read, believed to have been written by temple attendants of long ago. The verses speak not of battles or gods, but of dust, of time, of breath and shadow and the weight of years. The attendant kneels on the straw mat that lines the floor, not to recite these words aloud, but simply to be among them, to feel their presence as though sitting in a room with old friends who have nothing left to say, but everything left to share. The silence of this corner is different from the rest of the temple, deeper, closer, almost like a soft hum that only the bones can hear. After a long moment of stillness, the attendant rises, placing a small offering of dried lavender and 2 smooth stones in the niche beneath the verses, a gesture of respect, a quiet thanks to those who kept this place long before. The day now continues forward, not changing its nature but revealing more of its rhythm. Apprentices pass quietly through the halls, carrying trays of fruit and bread for the noon offering, while others sweep the outer steps or refill the hand basins near the public entrance. The attendant walks among them with the same calm presence as always, neither leading nor following, but simply being, available, aware, centered. In the outer courtyard, the fountain's sound mingles with the faint voices of city life returning beyond the walls, a soft reminder that the world outside is larger and louder. But here within the temple, life moves on its own terms, shaped, not by noise or demand, but by continuity, intention, and the silent agreement that this work, though quiet, though unseen, is essential. A visitor arrives mid-morning, an older man in simple robes with a weathered scroll in his hands, asking gently if he may sit beneath the olives and read in silence. The attendant nods, guiding him to a shaded bench and placing a clay cup of cool water nearby, then stepping back into the stone colonnade without a word. These small acts of service, welcoming, preparing, maintaining, are not spoken of, not recorded, but they form the backbone of temple life. As midday approaches, and the light becomes more direct and hot against the courtyard stones, the attendant returns to the sanctuary one final time before the next set of rituals, standing for a moment in the long, warm glow that now pours in from the southern arch. The statue of the god watches as always, unmoving, steady, and yet in the dancing light, its expression seems softer, less remote, more like a witness than a judge. The attendant bows gently and breathes deeply, inhaling the rich scent of oil, herbs, and sun-bathed stone, letting it fill their lungs with the strange, heavy comfort of tradition. And with that, they step into the next task, the next moment, the next silent offering, as the temple continues to breathe and exist, not in stories or myths of grandeur, but in the boring, beautiful, sacred repetition of care. As midday reaches its peak and the sun sits high in the pale blue sky, sending shafts of unwavering heat down upon the whitewashed stone of the temple walls and flagstone paths, the world within the temple begins to slow even further, if such a thing is possible, settling into the deep, unhurried quiet that defines this sacred hour. The air is warm but not oppressive, made bearable by the high vaulted ceilings that trap shadows in their curves, and by the coolness preserved within the thick stone that has absorbed and released the sun's breath for generations. The temple, attendant having completed their rounds of morning service and minor duties, now takes up the midday responsibility known as the still watch, a practice not of labor, but of stillness itself, a time when one sits or walks slowly through the sanctuary without task or voice, simply existing, observing and holding the space open for the divine. The practice is assigned to a different attendant each day, and though it appears simple, it is considered one of the highest forms of devotion, for it requires the ability to do nothing while remaining fully present. Today, the attendant chooses to perform their still watch walking slowly through the outer sanctum, a shaded arcade lined with columns whose fluted surfaces catch the shifting light and cast rippling shadows along the walls like reflections on water. With deliberate, measured steps, the attendant moves along this path, their hands folded lightly before them, their gaze soft and unfocused, not searching, not inspecting, simply seeing. They pass by carved niches containing offerings both fresh and old wilted flowers left at the base of a stone lion, a feather tucked between two stones, a slice of dried fig still glistening slightly with sweetness. None are disturbed, for the purpose of the still watch is not to touch, not to alter, but to witness, to acknowledge with the body what the spirit already honors. The quiet is nearly total. Somewhere far off, a cicada begins its rhythmic song, rising and falling like breath, and the sound of a clay pitcher being set down echoes once from the kitchen courtyard, before fading into stillness once more. The attendant continues, turning at the arcade's end, passing beneath a carved frieze depicting the seasonal cycle. Gods and mortals engaged not in battle, but in farming, weaving, carrying water, and making offerings, each figure rendered with the same reverent stillness that defines the temple's character. A gust of warm wind enters from the open side of the arcade, rustling the hem of the attendant's tunic and lifting a fine layer of dust from the stone floor, which swirls gently before settling again, like memory. After the circuit is complete, the attendant sits at the base of a low column, where a small square of sun rests upon the floor like a quiet invitation, and simply breathes. There are no thoughts to entertain, no goals to fulfill, just the sound of their own breath, the warmth of the stone at their back, and the endless, anchoring quiet of a place built not for spectacle, but for steadiness. The minutes pass without effort, time no longer segmented by tasks or bells but flowing softly like a slow stream through a quiet forest. Occasionally, a priest or another attendant walks by, offering a brief glance of recognition and respect, but no words are exchanged, and none are needed. Even the gods, it is believed, respect this hour of sacred stillness, for it is said that during the still watch, the boundary between divine and mortal breath grows thinnest, not through miracle, but through the quiet act of sharing space without asking anything in return. After nearly an hour, the shadow of the column has shifted, stretching further across the stone floor, and the attendant rises, smooths their robe, and returns through the eastern corridor toward the preparation room. There they will rinse their hands in rosewater, as tradition dictates after completing the still watch, and record the date and their initials in a small clay ledger kept by the altar, a practice that leaves no story, no explanation, only a quiet acknowledgement that for 1 hour, someone was present and aware. And then, with the day's rhythm continuing undisturbed, the attendant moves on to the next small task, folding fresh prayer ribbons for the evening's rites, cutting them from long bolts of cloth dyed with pomegranate and saffron, tying each one into loops and placing them into a shallow basket, ready to be distributed with quiet hands and soft voices when the sun finally begins to fall. And so the temple, still humming with the warmth of the sun and the peace of tradition, continues on, unchanged, unhurried, perfectly still in its movement forward. As the afternoon drifts gently forward and the sun begins its slow tilt westward, the light inside the temple softens once again, turning from the bright gold of midday to the richer, deeper hues of honey and amber, casting long, mellow shadows that stretch along the stone corridors like winding streams of color. The temple attendant, having completed the sacred still watch and entered the next quiet stage of the daily rhythm, now turns their attention to the care of the prayer ribbons, small, symbolic tokens tied by visitors onto olive branches, latticework, or dedicated posts near the minor altars, each one representing a wish, a vow, or a whispered word meant only for the gods. These ribbons, dyed in soft natural colors, pale rose from crushed petals, dusky yellow from marigolds, and the lightest violet from soaked iris roots, are fragile, fraying at the edges, and their care is a task both meditative and slow. The attendant begins by sorting the worn ribbons from the fresh, folding each gently into bundles for burning or reuse, depending on its condition, and laying them out on a cloth mat stretched across a shaded stone bench near the herb garden. The sunlight dapples the cloth as if nature itself is taking part in the process, and the air is filled with the mingled scents of sage, lavender, and thyme, plants that grow thick and low in the warm soil, brushed often by the robes of those who pass. The work is slow and satisfying, a task that requires no decisions, only attentiveness and the quiet care of fingers moving in repetitive patterns. As the attendant works, a few bees hum lazily nearby, drifting between the flowering rosemary bushes and the cool shadow beneath the garden wall. Far off, the sound of a lyre can be heard. Someone in the city, perhaps practicing in the shade of their home, plucking the strings in a rhythm that matches the afternoon's pace. Occasionally, an apprentice passes with a nod, carrying a jug of water or a folded tunic to the laundry room, but the space remains largely undisturbed, a quiet oasis of focus and simplicity. After finishing the sorting, the attendant gathers the retired ribbons into a clay bowl and walks slowly to the small offering hearth set near the temple's northern edge, where a modest flame is kept burning throughout the day for exactly this kind of personal devotion. One by one, they feed the ribbons into the flame, watching as the soft fabric curls, darkens, and vanishes into gentle spirals of smoke, each one carrying with it the weight of hope or memory, released without ceremony, but with care. They do not know what each ribbon once held, only that it mattered to someone, and that honoring it through this quiet act is part of the life they have chosen. Afterward, they return to the bench and prepare new ribbons, cutting them from bolts of cloth stored in a cedarwood box, using a bone-handled blade passed down through many generations of temple workers. Each ribbon is cut to the same precise length, measured against the width of the attendant's forearm, and folded once before being tied with a simple knot that symbolizes humility and continuity. They are then placed in a wide, shallow basket, lined with olive leaves ready to be handed out during the evening rite. As the attendant finishes, they pause for a moment, resting their hands on the edge of the bench and closing their eyes to feel the sun on their face, the warmth of the stone at their back, the cool breath of shade on their neck, the faint whisper of leaves moving above. This is a moment that belongs to no one, that holds no story, that will not be remembered, but it is complete in its stillness, a small part of the long, unchanging breath of the temple itself. When the breeze rises again, the attendant stands and carries the basket through the colonnade, back toward the inner courtyard, where the shadows now stretch long and the sounds of preparation for the evening rituals begin to rise. The faint clatter of vessels being arranged, the low murmur of apprentices reviewing the day's tasks, the rhythmic brushing of a broom against the marble floor, the ribbons warm from the sun and soft to the touch will soon be handed out with quiet words, each one accepted with reverence, tied with hope, and left behind with the unspoken wish that someone, perhaps a god, perhaps no one, will notice. The attendant places the basket on the designated stone table, ensuring it sits evenly, then turns away, moving without haste toward the sanctuary's open doors, where the light is beginning to soften into the deep golden hue that signals the transition from afternoon to early evening, the time when the day's energy gently recedes and the temple breathes more slowly, preparing itself once again for night. As the warm light of late afternoon slowly deepens into early evening, stretching across the temple walls in long golden bands and tinting the marble with the color of aging parchment, the space begins to ease into its nightly rhythm, predictable, slow, and filled with soft tasks that drift toward conclusion like the final pages of a well-worn scroll. The temple attendant, having completed the preparation of the prayer ribbons and ensured the courtyard was swept of fallen petals and wind-blown dust, now returns to the sanctuary to begin the arrangement of the evening altar, a space prepared, not for spectacle, but for the quiet offering of gratitude to the gods for the completion of another uneventful day. This altar, a smaller twin to the grand central one, sits to the west beneath a narrow opening in the ceiling that catches the setting sun's light only for a brief window each evening, illuminating the altar stone with a soft amber glow for exactly the amount of time needed to prepare and offer the evening flame. The attendant approaches with measured steps, carrying a wooden tray on which rest the familiar ritual items. A shallow bronze bowl for water, a smooth round stone used in the blessing gesture, a small vessel of oil perfumed with crushed bay and thyme, and a single white taper to be lit from the central flame. Everything is placed with the quiet assurance of repetition, each item aligned precisely with the others, the tray set to the right of the altar stone, the bowl to the left, the stone placed directly in the center and the oil to the side, ready to anoint the wick. As the sun reaches the edge of the ceiling aperture, a golden shaft of light spills down onto the altar, illuminating the pale stone and casting faint shadows from the objects, as if the gods themselves lean forward to watch. The attendant bows, once deeply and without a word, then lights the taper from the sanctuary's central flame, shielding it with a cupped hand as they transfer it carefully to the small stone lamp awaiting it on the evening altar. As the wick catches, a steady glow blossoms across the altar, reflecting warmly in the polished bronze and rising in gentle light across the carved faces of the statues nearby. The attendant uses the perfumed oil to trace a small circle on the altar's surface, a gesture not grand but essential, symbolizing the closure of the day's cycle and the continuity of protection through the night. This ritual is short, wordless, and witnessed only by stone and flame, yet it holds great meaning within the unbroken chain of temple life, repeated every night by hands both old and young across generations. Once complete, the attendant kneels, quietly beside the altar, head bowed, and breathes in deeply, savoring the scent of oil, the soft warmth of the flickering light, the distant rustle of evening wind in the olive branches beyond the temple walls. For a time, they remain in that posture, not praying in words but simply sharing presence with the stillness around them, their breath rising and falling in time with the fading light. Eventually, as the golden shaft begins to recede and the sky beyond the ceiling darkens by degrees. They rise once more and tidy the altar, removing only the unused items and leaving the flame to burn into the early night. Outside the sanctuary, the apprentices have begun to gather the dinner trays, and the scent of warm lentils, baked barley cakes, and roasted onion drifts lazily through the colonnade, grounding the sacredness of the evening with the quiet familiarity of sustenance. The attendant joins them only briefly, not to eat yet, but to observe, ensuring that each tray is balanced, each cup filled, and that nothing has been overlooked. A shared meal, though simple, is treated with care in the temple, not for indulgence, but as a recognition that even the gods rest, and so too must those who serve them. Once all is prepared, the attendant walks the perimeter of the courtyard one last time before nightfall, checking the alignment of lamps, securing shutters, and pausing at each corner to observe the light as it fades from the sky, replaced slowly by the soft twinkle of early stars peeking through the indigo veil above. The temple now seems to hold its breath not in tension, but in calm anticipation of night's embrace, and the attendant, aware of every shift in scent and sound, moves like a part of the stone itself, neither apart from nor above the space, but within it, woven into its slow and sacred continuity. Another day is nearly complete, not marked by events or miracles, but by the steady progression of small tasks performed with presence, and the gentle, unspoken promise that everything, no matter how quiet or boring, matters. With twilight now descending gently over the temple and the once golden walls beginning to fade into soft tones of gray and pearl, the entire complex takes on a different mood, neither solemn nor celebratory, but something deeply still, as if the very stones are sighing softly, releasing the heat of the day and settling into the long exhale of evening. The temple attendant, moving without the need for thought, begins their final evening duties, the last gentle rituals that close the sacred day before true night takes hold. First among these is the lamp path, a tradition older than anyone can remember, wherein the perimeter lamps, each resting in shallow niches carved into the lower walls of the courtyard, are inspected, adjusted, and, where needed, gently rekindled. Carrying a small bundle of fresh wicks and a stoppered vessel of oil across the length of the temple's inner square, the attendant stops at each lamp, kneels quietly, and performs the same motion they've done every evening for years. Lift the cover, inspect the wick, test the flame, top up the oil if needed, then lower the cover again with a motion so practiced it's more like a breath than a task. The lamps, spaced evenly like constellations drawn close to the earth, emit a soft, steady light that plays across the white flagstones, making them appear as though stitched with gold thread. Occasionally, a moth flutters through the circle of warmth, drawn toward the flame and then away again, its wings casting delicate shadows against the temple wall. The air by now is cool and carries with it the scent of the gardens, thyme and bay, jasmine and dust, while the faint chirp of nocturnal insects provides the only accompaniment to the sound of oil gently settling in its clay container. After completing the lamp path, the attendant circles once through the garden paths, not to prune or water now, but simply to observe, ensuring that the gate is latched, responding softly to the faintest whisper of the wind. All is as it should be. The lamps tended, the flame preserved, the records marked, the stones swept, the prayers folded, the garden checked, that the small benches beneath the fig trees are undisturbed, that the sacred plants in their stone pots appear strong and undamaged. The moon, now rising in its pale fullness over the far wall, casts a silver glow across the smooth surface of the prayer fountain, and for a moment the attendant pauses there, dipping 2 fingers into the cool water and brushing it across their brow in the ancient motion of clearing the mind before sleep. The night, though still young, has now fully arrived, and its presence is unmistakable. The blue of the sky deep and endless, the shadows no longer stretched but settled, gathered like soft fabric along the bases of columns and beneath the overhangs. The temple's main doors have been secured from within, not locked, for temples are never locked, but sealed gently with a rope of woven reeds and cloth, a symbolic gesture that marks the completion of the day's cycle and reminds all who remain Inside that, the space has shifted from active service to sacred stillness. Within the sanctuary, the central flame burns lower now, not diminished but softened like a whisper rather than a voice. And the stone floor gleams faintly beneath it, absorbing its warmth and releasing it back in the form of quiet comfort. The attendant returns to the inner chambers, their footsteps slow and unhurried, passing through the main corridor where the scent of warm oil lingers, and the shadows of the carved friezes on the wall now appear deeper, more mysterious, more dreamlike. One last stop remains before rest, the scroll alcove where the day's brief notations are made. This log, inscribed with a stylus into a flat clay tablet, does not record events of note or dramatic occurrences, for none have happened. Instead, the entry is simple. Lamps tended, ribbons placed, still watch observed, flame sustained. These quiet affirmations are all that is needed, the temple's memory held not in dramatic storytelling, but in the steady pulse of duty performed and presence maintained. With the notation complete, the attendant places the stylus into its holder and steps back into the corridor, their duties now fulfilled, their breath slow and even, their body tuned to the silence around them. The night will pass as all nights do here, without alarm, without interruption, watched over by flame and star and stone. And tomorrow, the sun will rise again over the eastern wall, and the rhythm will begin anew, unchanged, unhurried, perfectly still. As the attendant steps into their small chamber for the final time that day, the door closes with a soft pull, and the sound of the temple breathing in its endless rhythm continues, subtle and eternal beneath the sky. With the temple now fully surrendered to night and the last of the oil lamps flickering gently against the smooth stone surfaces, the atmosphere has shifted into something almost otherworldly. Not mystical in the dramatic sense of epic tales and divine appearances, but sacred in a quieter, heavier way, as if the very walls themselves were deep in thought, remembering things long forgotten by the world outside. Inside the attendant's small sleeping chamber, which rests at the far eastern corner of the temple complex, far from the public areas and cloisters, the air is cooler, touched by the breeze that slips in through a narrow, high window that faces the olive grove. The grove's branches sway slightly under the weight of the night wind, and their shadows dance across the wall in faint, shifting shapes that resemble the slow movement of water. The attendant lies in their cot once more, the woven blanket pulled lightly over their body, the thin mattress cradling their form in the same familiar embrace it has for countless nights. But unlike the earlier rest they took between tasks, this is the deeper rest, the full surrender to night that marks the end of conscious duty. Still, the transition from wakefulness to sleep is not immediate, and the attendant, used to moving, slowly in both body and thought, lets their mind drift freely through the impressions of the day. Not memories in the narrative sense, but sensations, images, and patterns. They remember the warmth of sun on the altar stone, the coolness of spring water drawn at dawn, the texture of folded ribbons beneath their fingertips, the faint fragrance of thyme in the air at dusk, and the sound of the central flame crackling softly in the sanctuary. These sensations do not form a story, for there is no need for story now. Only presence, only the hum of a life lived in harmony with silence. From their cot, the attendant can faintly hear the muffled creak of old wood expanding in the night air, the almost imperceptible rustle of another attendant turning in their own room nearby, and the ever-steady rhythm of the breeze passing through the open halls, lifting and carrying the cool breath of stone down long corridors where shadows sleep beside statues. The temple does not truly sleep, for it is not alive in the way a person is, and yet it holds its silence like breath, exhaling calm across every corner, pressing gently against every closed door, flowing into every room like invisible water. The cot is positioned so that even from their back, the attendant can see a sliver of the night sky through the window, just enough to glimpse a patch of stars, a curved piece of moon, and sometimes, if their eyes adjust just so, the silhouette of the olive branches swaying slowly in front of it. They watch without focus, the way one watches clouds drift or candlelight flicker, not searching for meaning but accepting the rhythm of what is. Eventually, As the minutes pass and the mind sinks deeper into the soft cradle of darkness, the breath grows slower, the chest rising and falling in time with the wind, with the trees, with the quiet. The thoughts that surface are not urgent. They float by without attachment. A prayer half remembered. The name of an old attendant spoken only in dreams. The image of a statue's face in firelight. And then, these thoughts dissolve too, replaced only by breath and warmth and the softness of night. Somewhere far off, a temple dog turns in its sleep and lets out a short, contented sigh, and the attendant, nearly asleep now, hears it only as a vague echo, an affirmation that everything in the temple remains in place, that nothing has broken the calm, and as sleep takes hold completely, wrapping the attendant in its formless arms, the temple remains as it always does, watching, waiting, resting in its endless cycle of dusk to dawn, light to shadow, silence to silence, holding gently all who dwell within, and promising that when the stars fade and the sky begins to pale again, the day will return with the same peace, the same slowness, and the same sacred, uneventful rhythm that it always has. The hours pass in silence, uninterrupted and undisturbed as the temple sleeps beneath a blanket of soft shadows and starlight, and while the world beyond its protective walls may carry on with its own restless turning, faint echoes of distant hooves on cobblestones, the hushed voices of late returning citizens, or the fluttering of wind along rooftops, within the temple all remains unchanged, wrapped in the kind of deep stillness that only comes from long years of practiced calm. The flame in the sanctuary burns low but steady, maintained by another attendant whose nightly watch unfolds with the same slow, deliberate rhythm as every task here, and the light it casts dances faintly along the curved surfaces of the god's statue, highlighting parts of the carved form before allowing them to fade again into the surrounding dark. In their private chamber, the temple attendant lies in uninterrupted sleep, body curled slightly toward the wall, one hand resting beside the simple linen pillow, breath so quiet it seems not to disturb even the air. No dreams disturb them, or, if they come gently, shaped not by dramatic visions but by memory's soft residue, the sound of the oil ladle clinking against bronze, the rustle of robes along the garden path, the cool weight of water poured carefully into a sacred bowl. Time inside the temple does not move quickly, and at night it seems not to move at all, merely pausing to allow the body and the building to rest together in mutual stillness. Occasionally, a breeze drifts through the small window set high in the stone wall, bringing with it the faintest scent of crushed myrtle or flowering night jasmine from the outer garden, and the subtle change in air, though minute, settles lightly into the room like a second layer of sleep, as if nature itself had pressed gently into the temple's heart. Somewhere near the central corridor, a clay basin creaks slightly as the moisture of the day releases from its cool interior, and the old wood of a storage door shifts almost imperceptibly, the temple's bones reminding its dwellers that even stillness has movement, if one listens closely enough. Yet none of these sounds disturb the resting figure of the attendant, who remains perfectly still, breathing in and out in time with the soft rhythm of the night. Above, through the narrow view of sky visible from the window's angle, the stars have turned slightly, the slow rotation of the heavens continuing in their eternal journey, marking time not in minutes or hours, but in arcs and silence. A passing cloud crosses the moon's face, dimming the already faint glow within the room, and then drifts on, as if nothing here were important enough to linger over. Though in its own quiet way, the temple carries more history, more presence, and more sacred continuity than many grander places known beyond its walls. The cot beneath the attendant creaks once as they shift slightly in their sleep, the kind of instinctive motion the body makes only when it has been allowed to rest completely, and then the chamber falls silent again, except for the quiet rustle of the olive trees outside, silence intact. This is a life without disruption, without ambition, without spectacle, and in that it is a kind of perfection. For the attendant, sleep is not a retreat, but a continuation of service. Even in slumber, they lie within the rhythm of the temple's breath, part of the living silence that stretches from one generation to the next. And as the final third of the night approaches, when the stars are their sharpest and the air is its coolest, The temple remains wrapped in that familiar embrace of shadow, flickering light, and endless patience, holding the attendant and everything around them in the protective calm of ancient stone, gentle wind, and quiet purpose. As the night glides into its final phase and the eastern horizon begins its slow transition from deep black to the faintest whisper of gray-blue, the temple, while still wrapped in silence, begins to stir, not through sound or motion, but through subtle changes in light and air, as though the very stones anticipate the dawn before it arrives. The sanctuary remains quiet, its eternal flame steady and low, casting a soft pool of amber over the polished floor and the base of the god statue, whose expression remains unchanged, unreadable, and endlessly still. The garden beyond the colonnade holds its breath in this in-between moment, the trees unmoving, the petals on the night-blooming flowers closed gently as if asleep. Inside the attendant's chamber, the cool air has settled more deeply now, and a single breeze slips through the open window, brushing softly across the attendant's resting form. The blanket rises slightly with the draft before resettling, and the sound of it, a gentle hiss of fabric shifting, echoes faintly against the quiet stone. The attendant, not quite awake but no longer fully asleep, lies with eyes closed, balanced at the edge of consciousness, not urged to rise but merely aware of the soft pull of morning's approach. Their breathing remains slow, the rhythm of sleep not yet broken, but something inside them stirs, a gentle awareness that soon the day will begin again, just as it always does. This moment between night and day is sacred in its own way, honored not with chants or flames, but by the simple, active presence of remaining still while the world changes imperceptibly around you. The stars overhead begin to fade, not all at once but gradually, like the soft extinguishing of candles in a great hall, while the moon, now low and pale, casts one final silver thread across the floor before slipping behind the far wall. In the hallways beyond the chamber, nothing moves, no footsteps sound, no voices murmur. And yet, a subtle tension releases from the temple walls, like the last deep breath before waking. The scrolls remain tucked in their niches, the bowls are stacked where they were left, the lamps flicker faintly in their wall sconces, and the garden's stone path is untouched, save for a scattering of dew-covered petals blown gently across it during the quietest hour of the night. Somewhere, an owl calls once, short, deep, and satisfied, and then silence returns, fuller than before. The temple, built for continuity and rooted in centuries of slow repetition, does not rush to greet the day, nor does it resist it. It simply receives what comes. And the attendant, feeling the cool air slip across their cheek, lets out a slow, unconscious breath, the kind that comes just before the body decides to rise. But not yet. Not this moment. There is still time to lie still. Still time to remain part of the hush, to exist between yesterday and today, to listen without listening, to breathe without thinking, to exist without needing to move. In this gentle pause, the temple is neither fully asleep nor fully awake, and the attendant remains inside that space like a leaf resting on still water, held not by force but by natural quiet. This moment, so small, so easy to overlook, holds the weight of centuries, of generations who have lain in that same room, on that same cot, under that same rising light, breathing the same slow breath, waiting for the sun to return so they may rise and perform again the sacred tasks that hold the world in place not through power or praise, but through quiet, repetitive care. And so the moment stretches just a little longer, like a shadow clinging to the base of a column before the sun lifts it away, and everything remains untouched, undisturbed, and perfectly, peacefully still, as the first pale strokes of morning finally brush the sky beyond the temple's eastern wall. The long-held stillness begins to lift, not as a sudden awakening, but as a quiet unfurling, like petals opening under the gentle command of sunlight, or like a long breath finally released after a night of silence. Inside the attendant's modest stone chamber, the light that creeps through the high window is no longer moonlight or starlight, but the soft, gray gold of early dawn, muted and diffused, casting no sharp shadows yet, only the faintest glow, that settles across the floor and gently touches the edges of the folded blanket, the wooden shelf, the unlit lamp on the wall. The attendant, long accustomed to this rhythm, rises not with alarm or resistance but with a kind of practiced grace, sitting upright in the cot with a motion so fluid and quiet that it might not disturb even a sleeping moth. There is no yawn, no stretch, only movement. They place their bare feet onto the cool stone floor, press a palm briefly against the wall for balance, and sit for a moment in the silence, eyes half closed, breathing in the earthy scent of stone, dust, dried herbs, and faint wood smoke still lingering from the sanctuary flame. The waking is not abrupt. It is a continuation of sleep, just with open eyes and slower breath. The linen robe for the day is folded at the foot of the cot, clean, smelling faintly of lemon balm and sun. The attendant dresses with care, each motion deliberate, each fold adjusted until it sits just so, because even the smallest ritual when performed with awareness is a kind of reverence. They take the short walk down the corridor that leads toward the outer basin, where the first act of every day begins with water, always water. The cleansing basin, carved from a single slab of pale stone, is fed by a small underground spring and sits beneath a modest archway at the edge of the garden, just where the first fingers of sunlight touch the ground. The attendant cups their hands, fills them, and lets the cool liquid wash over their face, their neck, their forearms, an awakening not for the mind, but for the body, for the skin, for the breath. There is no mirror here, no reflection sought, only sensation, only presence. The water trickles back into the basin, catching a glint of golden light as it falls. The ritual complete, they dry their hands on a cloth laid neatly beside the basin the night before, then make their way across the silent courtyard, where the dew still clings to the grass and small birds hop quietly along the walls pecking at invisible seeds or inspecting cracks between stones. The temple is not yet truly awake, but it is aware. The flames in the sanctuary still burn softly, the oil lamplight flickering low and warm. The outer gates remain closed and no visitors have yet arrived, but the sanctuary waits, like a bowl held out to catch something sacred. The attendant walks to the preparation alcove beside the altar and begins the first task of the new day, gathering the items for the morning flame rite. A small clay bowl, a vial of oil pressed from last season's olives, a folded square of white cloth and a small sprig of rosemary bundled in twine are placed gently into a shallow tray. Each item is inspected, centered, and touched briefly, with both hands, an act of acknowledgement, not necessity. Outside, the sky has turned lighter now, pale and clean, and shadows begin to reappear in the familiar grooves of the stone floor. Everything is just as it was yesterday and will be again tomorrow. The scrolls remain in their niches, the prayer stones at the base of the column remain undisturbed, and the lines carved into the altar floor remain unread by most but deeply known to the attendant. The sacred day begins not with music or bells, but with the same small motions, the same measured steps, the same breath. And in these repetitions lies the heartbeat of the temple, a heartbeat not felt in moments of passion or glory, but in quiet, consistent service, passed down through hands and breath and silence one dawn after another. The attendant, ready now, pauses once before lighting the morning flame, breathing in deeply, feeling the warmth of the stone beneath their fingertips, and stepping into the light that now pours gently through the columns, illuminating the altar. The tray, the stone, and the simple life that unfolds again, slowly, silently, sacredly, with the morning flame now lit and the first ritual of the day completed in silent precision. The temple slowly begins to absorb the full presence of daylight, and its spaces, once hushed under moon and star, take on a new kind of stillness. Not the quiet of rest, but the quiet of steady purpose. The air in the sanctuary is warmer now, and the light passing through the open colonnades paints the marble floors in soft, slanting patterns that shift almost imperceptibly as the sun rises. Higher, the temple attendant moves calmly between the inner chambers, preparing for the arrival of the early pilgrims, those who come not to ask for grand intervention, but to offer small acts of gratitude, to whisper names into the air, to tie ribbons, or to sit quietly near the garden's edge with a cup of spring water in hand. There is no need to rush. Everything has been arranged as it was yesterday and the day before. The bowls polished, the scrolls in their places, the courtyard swept, the herb bundles refreshed with sprigs of mint and lavender from the shaded bed behind the fountain. The attendant, carrying a small tray of barley bread and oil, walks the path toward the outer altar, a simple stone slab nestled at the junction between the sacred garden and the public passage, where travelers and townsfolk leave offerings throughout the day. The bread is placed gently on the center of the altar, the oil poured in a slow spiral on a flat dish, a motion the attendant performs not as art, but as habit honed by reverence. Once the offering is arranged, they step back and bow slightly, allowing the moment to settle. No announcement is made. No one sees this act, and yet it is done every morning without fail, a gesture woven into the fabric of the temple's rhythm. From there, the attendant passes through the herb courtyard, where shadows still linger beneath the fig and bay trees, and pauses near the outer gate, which will soon be opened by another servant. For now it remains barred not to keep people out, but to give the temple a moment longer to breathe undisturbed. The attendant turns and continues along the colonnade, stopping to brush a few petals from the stone benches, straighten a ceramic urn that has shifted slightly on its base, and untangle a windblown ribbon caught on a low hedge. Each movement is small, nearly invisible, but together they form a chain of care that holds the temple steady in its place. When the gate finally opens, and the first quiet footsteps begin to enter the courtyard, sandals brushing against gravel, voices hushed out of instinct, the temple welcomes them without sound. A mother and child sit near the outer fountain, the child tracing shapes in the dust with a stick. An old man lays a sprig of rosemary on the altar and closes his eyes for a long moment. A young woman ties a pale ribbon to the offering post, her hands trembling slightly as she presses her forehead to the stone before turning away. The attendant watches all this not as a guardian, but as a witness, their presence part of the space rather than apart from it. Occasionally they step forward to hand someone a fresh cloth for cleansing, or to refill a vessel of water with spring-fed calmness. They do not speak unless spoken to, and even then, their replies are soft, measured, no more than a few words. The temple does not demand more. As the morning unfolds, the sun continues its quiet climb, and the warmth settles over the courtyard in gentle layers, touching the vines that hang down over the inner wall and casting leafy shadows onto the stone paths. The statue of the god, visible from nearly every angle in the sanctuary, seems to glow faintly now, not from any magic, but from the way light and time have worked together to smooth its surface, to warm its face, to give it the presence of something lived with, rather than worshipped from afar. The attendant, still moving with calm purpose, walks one final time through the sanctuary's heart, adjusting the offering bowls, brushing away a thin layer of morning dust from the altar steps, and checking the high windows to ensure the breeze flows gently through the chamber. All is as it should be. The temple is awake. The day has begun. And beneath the surface of its rituals, the soft hum of stillness continues, steady as ever, wrapping every stone, every movement, and every breath in a rhythm older than memory and quieter than thought. With the sun now gently climbing into the upper arc of the sky and the temple's morning slowly shifting into midday, the atmosphere across the sacred grounds becomes less a matter of ritual and more one of maintenance, a quiet continuation of the morning's rhythm, uninterrupted and almost unnoticed like the slow turning of a water wheel on a calm stream. The temple attendant, having already completed the early rites and observed the procession of pilgrims who came with their small offerings and silent hopes, now moves through the administrative core of the temple complex, a section far less visited, but no less important, where ledgers are updated, supplies are inventoried, and the unseen structure behind every visible act of worship is quietly preserved. The chamber they enter is small and shaded, its windows narrow slits that allow light only in thin vertical lines that fall across the rows of shelves holding scrolls, wax tablets, and clay tokens inscribed with the marks of past offerings. Here, seated on a simple wooden stool, the attendant takes up a stylus and begins to inscribe the morning's notes. not in lengthy sentences or reflective entries, but in short, practical notations. Bread placed, oil poured, visitor ribbons renewed, altar swept. The wax accepts each mark with a faint scratching sound, a rhythm so familiar it becomes a kind of meditation. And once each item is listed, the tablet is gently stacked with others bearing nearly identical entries from days, weeks, and years past. Nothing changes much, and that is precisely the point. Once the records are stored away, the attendant moves to the storage alcove, a cool stone-lined room where jars of oil, woven cloths, baskets of dried herbs, and preserved offerings are kept, each item labeled not with elaborate script but with quiet utilitarian marks that speak of long use and longer care. They check each jar for cracks, ensuring the contents are protected, and rearrange the shelves so the oldest items remain near the front, always used first, never wasted. A basket of dried hyssop is transferred to the outer chamber, its strong, herbal scent briefly filling the air before it settles again, part of the background tapestry of temple fragrance, part earth, part oil, part ash. As the sun's light reaches deeper into the alcove, illuminating the corners with soft golden warmth, the attendant steps out into the colonnade and walks its length once more, pausing to adjust a crooked cloth covering, to pull a trailing vine away from the walking path, to straighten a prayer mat left slightly folded at its edge. These movements are not performed with urgency, but with practiced ease, the way one might tend a garden or sweep a courtyard. Not to impress, but because the act itself sustains the balance of the space. Along the way, a junior attendant approaches with a question about the placement of a ceremonial bowl. The senior nods, gestures softly, offers a few quiet words, then watches as the apprentice turns and walks away, carrying their task with new assurance. There is no hierarchy loudly expressed here. Respect is woven into tone, into rhythm, into the unspoken understanding that continuity is more important than authority. The sun continues to rise. Birds return to the fig tree beside the outer, while hopping from branch to branch, their calls low and irregular, part of the natural music of the day. Somewhere beyond the temple gate, the city breathes with greater motion. Merchants call to one another. Carts rattle down stone streets, and voices rise and fall like the crests of small waves. But all of that remains on the other side of the threshold. Within the temple, life continues at its own pace, tuned not to noise or time, but to breath and touch and the repetition of sacred tasks. The attendant, feeling the soft heat of the sun now warming their back, pauses beside a carved pillar and rests a hand on its surface, feeling the coolness of the shaded stone slowly giving way to warmth. They close their eyes not to pray, not to think, but simply to listen. To the wind brushing past the columns, to the rustle of a robe in a distant hallway, to the steady flame that burns somewhere just beyond the next chamber. In that moment, time narrows to a thread. No past, no future, just the hum of a still world in motion. The attendant opens their eyes again and continues walking, one measured step after another, through a temple that breathes as they do, slowly, consistently, without end. With midday finally cresting and the full light of the sun now pouring into the temple's open spaces like honey warmed by fire, every surface within the sanctuary seems to exhale, stones releasing their stored heat, water in basins growing, just slightly warmer. The clay walls along the outer corridors glowing faintly with the softness of age and exposure. It is during this peak hour of brightness that the temple enters a peculiar stillness not born of ritual, but of rhythm. A pause observed not by decree but by centuries of habit. A time when duties slow to their lowest hum and even the most active hands rest briefly from their cycles of preparation and service. The temple attendant, knowing this hour well, finds a shaded spot beneath the colonnade near the eastern herb beds where the sunlight filters through a trellis of grapevines, casting gently swaying patterns onto the smooth paving stones below. Here, seated with their back against the cool base of a marble column, the attendant rests without sleeping, body still, mind quiet, gaze unfocused and drifting somewhere between observation and memory. Around them, the subtle language of the temple continues, a bee landing softly on the rim of a water jar, the gentle squeak of wooden shutters adjusting as the breeze picks up slightly, the occasional distant ring of a clay cup being placed gently onto stone. There are no spoken words, no directives, only the ambient pulse of continuity, life moving without needing to call attention to itself. The attendant's hands, resting loosely in their lap, still carry the faint scent of time and polished bronze, and their robe, now wrinkled at the elbows, holds a few stray fragments of crushed bay leaf collected during the earlier offerings. They make no move to brush them off. In this hour, perfection is not required, only presence. A nearby apprentice tasked with reorganizing the scroll bins beside the prayer niche moves past with careful steps, mindful not to disturb the calm. The attendant offers a soft nod, not of instruction but of quiet solidarity, and the apprentice nods in return before returning to their task. No further exchange is needed. Overhead, the fluttering of linen shades secured between the colonnade's beams mimics the movement of wings, soft, rhythmic, restful, and casts shifting shadows across the garden paths where a few fig leaves have fallen naturally into the dust. There is no desire to collect them now. The moment is not one of doing, but of being. In this stretch of timeless midday, even the god statue within the sanctuary seems less commanding and more companionable, its face half illuminated, half shadowed, as though resting along with the servants who maintain its domain. The central flame burns low, tended earlier and left to its quiet work, and the offering bowls remain undisturbed, each one holding just enough, never too much, never too little. The balance, maintained through countless repeated gestures, speaks louder than any offering. After what might be a long time or just a few minutes, the hours are never counted in this place. The attendant finally shifts slightly, adjusting their posture and blinking slowly, like someone emerging from a dream without remembering the story. They stand not with urgency, but with the fluid ease of someone who has risen from this very spot hundreds of times before. Dusting their hands on the fabric of their tunic, they turn toward the corridor that leads to the preparation room, where the next small duties of the afternoon await, perhaps the measuring of oil for the evening lamps or the tying of fresh sprigs to the offering baskets. The sun continues its arc above unbothered, and the shadows have now changed direction, painting the ground in slightly new shapes, though everything else remains just as it has been for centuries. The rhythm is steady, the silence is whole. The attendant walks slowly, barefoot along the warm stone, each step soft and deliberate, carrying with them the peace of the hour and the memory of stillness, wrapped invisibly around their shoulders like a robe made of silence and light. As the sun begins its slow, graceful descent toward the western hills, casting longer and warmer shadows across the temple's whitewashed courtyards and vine-laced colonnades, the temple attendant resumes their soft sequence of afternoon duties, tasks, which, though modest in appearance, are stitched with the same quiet reverence that shapes the grander moments of ritual. The stillness of the midday pause gradually gives way to the slow reawakening of sacred activity, not with fanfare or noise, but with small, precise gestures that return the temple to motion. One of the first tasks after rest is the preparation of offering bundles, small, carefully arranged gifts of grain, herbs, dried petals, and fragments of wax or cloth, meant to be left at minor shrines placed in shadowed corners and garden alcoves around the temple's perimeter. The attendant retrieves a wide, shallow basket from the supply alcove, then walks calmly to the shaded corner of the herb courtyard, where bundles of dried mint, rosemary, and hyssop have been strung on a low beam to finish curing. The air in this part of the temple is thick with the sharp, pleasant fragrance of preserved plants, and as the attendant begins to separate the herbs into measured portions, they do so with fingers as practiced as those of a weaver or scribe. Each pinch, and fold as deliberate as any priest's invocation. A scrap of wool cloth is tied around each small cluster, securing it not with a knot too tight to be undone, but with one that can be released easily by a future hand. Perhaps months later, when the bundle is gathered for burning or burial during one of the seasonal purification rites. The sound of dried stems snapping beneath gentle pressure is soft and irregular, like the quiet ticking of a distant clock, and the rhythm becomes a kind of meditation, one that requires no thoughts, only awareness of the weight, the texture, and the scent of each material. When the basket is full, the attendant rises and carries it through the side corridors of the temple, past doorways left ajar to let in the cooling breeze, past muraled walls depicting quiet, mythic scenes of agricultural offerings and domestic devotion. At each shrine, they place one bundle, bowing slightly, sometimes pausing a moment longer if the statue or carving feels particularly weathered by time. There are no prayers spoken aloud, no requests made, just the silent offering of care itself, given not because the gods demand it, but because the rhythm of temple life would feel incomplete without it. The Western Garden Shrine, nestled between a pair of myrtle trees that bend low in the late afternoon sun, receives the final bundle. Here the light is soft and golden, filtered through the trembling leaves, and the bench beside the shrine holds the faint imprint of someone who sat earlier, perhaps another attendant or a visiting elder from the city. The attendant sits for a moment, setting the basket down, hands resting loosely in their lap, shoulders relaxed. They listen to the garden, to the buzzing of bees returning to their hives, to the faint gurgle of the nearby water channel that winds through the lower path, and to the murmur of distant voices from the outer courtyard where pilgrims still pass quietly through. After a while, they rise and return the empty basket to the storeroom, pausing only once to adjust the curtain that separates the chamber from the hallway, a curtain embroidered long ago with faded geometric patterns, barely visible now, but no less respected. Back in the sanctuary, the statue of the god has begun to glow faintly again in the thickening light, as shadows stretch across the floor like liquid amber, reaching toward the edges of the chamber, as if chasing the last remnants of the day. The attendant steps forward and checks the state of the central flame, noting its size, the condition of the wick, the alignment of the surrounding lamp bowls. Everything is in order. There is still time before the evening rite, still space for a few final slow motions before the night returns. And so, with no urgency but with complete clarity, the attendant prepares a fresh taper for the upcoming ceremony, dipping it gently into the oil, smoothing it between their palms, and laying it beside the altar with the same care they give to every gesture, because here, in this world built of breath, stone, and fire, it is not the size of the act that matters, but the stillness in which it is done. As the light of day mellows into the deep gold of late afternoon, casting a gentle haze across the temple's stone surfaces and softening the colors of every garden leaf and sacred carving, the temple attendant moves with increasing slowness, not from fatigue, but from alignment with the natural rhythm that deepens as the day prepares to fold itself into evening. The sanctuary is quiet now, not silent, for the sounds that remain are those of soft activity. The flicker of flames, the rustle of robes brushing lightly against stone, the faint tapping of a bronze ladle against the rim of an oil bowl. These are not interruptions but notes in the ever-present music of this space, a score written in repetition and performed without audience. The attendant walks from the inner shrine toward the central hall, pausing to inspect the prayer scrolls housed in their small clay tubes along the alcove wall. Each one is tied with twine, its script unread unless unrolled, but their presence, orderly, undisturbed, brings a certain peace, as though every hope and whispered request recorded there adds weight to the calm of the place, grounding it further in purpose. The attendant does not read, only touches the tops of a few with the back of their fingers, affirming their placement before continuing toward the western colonnade, where a shaft of sunlight now slants across the walkway in a perfect band of light, illuminating the tiled floor in soft patterns that move as leaves flutter above. They step into the glow without hesitation, eyes half-lidded against the brilliance, the warmth pooling against their robe, and making the coolness of the shaded walls behind feel more profound by contrast. They stand there for a moment longer than necessary, letting the sun soak into the fabric at their shoulders and the top of their head, not thinking, not watching, only standing. There is something sacred in simply standing in the light. Eventually, they continue along the corridor to the small preparation area where the evening oil is stored. Jars lined neatly in recessed shelves, their surfaces marked with dates and contents, their stoppers wrapped in waxed linen to prevent the escape of fragrance or the intrusion of dust. The attendant selects the 3 jars needed for the evening rite, one of pressed bay oil, another of thyme-infused olive oil, and a third of plain oil used for the central flame. They carry the jars in a shallow reed basket, cradled carefully, in both hands, their weight familiar and steady, like a responsibility long understood and never questioned. The sanctuary, when they return, is already beginning to darken at its edges, the tall columns now half-shadowed, the statue of the god, bathed in indirect light that seems less like illumination and more like memory. The attendant places the jars at the edge of the altar, arranging them with the same symmetry used in every ritual, left to right, light to dark, oil to flame, and checks the taper laid earlier to ensure it is ready. Then they retrieve a soft cloth from the offering bench and begin wiping the surrounding stone. Not because it is dirty, but because the act itself brings clarity. The sound of cloth on stone is gentle and rhythmic, and the motion is slow, circular, purposeful. The cloth is lightly scented, and as it moves, the air is filled with a faint note of laurel and dust. There is no one watching. There is no rush. There is only this moment, this preparation, this humble maintenance of sacred space that has remained unchanged for lifetimes. Outside, the sun lowers further, and the sky begins to shift to the color of old parchment, pale, worn, comforting. A cool breeze moves through the hallway behind the altar, lifting the ends of the attendant's robe and stirring the flame in the corner lamp. They pause and look up, not at anything in particular, but simply to be aware, to witness the light, as it changes shape across the carved edges of the altar bowl. The evening ceremony is still a little while off, but everything is in place, everything prepared with care and with the patience required, not by rules, but by the nature of the work. Here nothing is hurried, because nothing sacred ever is. The attendant, now finished with their task, steps back from the altar, folds the cloth, and places it neatly beside the jars. Then they sit for a while on the small stone bench at the sanctuary's edge, their back straight, their breath slow, their gaze relaxed. In this pause, this quiet breath between task and ritual, they exist fully, completely, wrapped in the light of the fading day, held gently in the embrace of duty, repetition, and peace. As the day gradually leans into evening, the sky outside the temple softens from bright blue to a mellow blend of pastel oranges and pinks, and the warmth of the sun fades to a comfortable heat that lingers on the smooth stone surfaces and carries the faint scent of wild thyme and drying herbs. The temple's atmosphere shifts gently toward the quietude of dusk. The temple attendant, moving with the slow, deliberate care of one who knows the sacred weight of each small gesture, begins to prepare the courtyard for the evening offerings, a task that, while modest in scale, carries the unspoken importance of welcoming both the gods and the night with respect and attention. They retrieve a set of clean woven mats from the storage room, their fibers soft and well worn from use, and spread them carefully on the outer courtyard's stone paving, positioning each mat in alignment with the rising stars that will soon become visible in the twilight sky. This arrangement is not prescribed in any written rule, but has evolved through generations as a subtle way to honor the cosmos and its quiet presence above the temple walls. The attendant moves slowly, adjusting the edges of each mat to ensure they lie flat and undisturbed, running a hand gently over the woven surface as though blessing it with touch alone. Once the mats are laid, the attendant sets down small clay bowls filled with water collected from the temple's spring, along with trays holding sprigs of rosemary and bundles of fresh olive leaves, offerings to be used by the evening visitors, who will arrive soon to sit, pray, or simply rest in the temple's embrace. The air is cool now, carrying a faint chill from the nearby hills, and the attendant wraps a thin woolen shawl more securely around their shoulders, savoring the soft scratch of its fibers against the skin as a small comfort against the evening breeze. They pause for a moment to look upward through the open colonnade, where the first stars begin to twinkle faintly against the deepening sky. Venus, bright and steady, catching the eye like a silent sentinel, and Orion's belt, low on the horizon, heralding the approach of longer nights. The temple feels vast and ancient at this hour, its stones holding memories of countless sunsets, prayers whispered into the cool air, footsteps fading into silence. The attendant breathes deeply, the scents of olive, wildflower, and stone filling their lungs and allows themselves a brief moment of stillness, standing motionless as the world settles around them. From somewhere near the garden, the faint murmur of water flowing over a small stone basin provides a soothing backdrop, while the rustle of leaves in the evening breeze whispers like a lullaby sung by nature itself. As the shadows lengthen, visitors begin to arrive quietly. A few pilgrims from the city, their faces softened by the day's weariness and the anticipation of rest. An elderly woman carrying a small bundle of woven grass. A young man holding a clay flask with careful hands. The attendant greets each with a gentle nod and a soft smile, their presence steady and welcoming but never intrusive, allowing the quiet dignity of the space to enfold every visitor. The mats are soon occupied by those seeking solace, prayers, or simply the peace that comes from being surrounded by centuries of stillness and care. The attendant moves slowly among them, offering a small cup of water here, a fresh sprig of olive leaves there, their gestures precise but unobtrusive, a part of the fabric of the temple's embrace rather than its center. The sky darkens further, stars multiplying and deepening in clarity, and the attendant pauses near the outer gate, watching as the last visitors settle in, their soft voices merging with the night's hush. In this moment, the temple breathes, with all who inhabit it, stone and flesh, light and shadow, breath and silence, woven together in a tapestry of presence and devotion that needs no words to be understood. The attendant stands quietly, the cool evening air wrapping around them like a cloak, and as the first notes of the evening hymn rise softly from the inner sanctuary, they bow their head in respect, their hearts steady in the unchanging rhythm of sacred routine, ready to witness another peaceful night unfold beneath the watchful stars. As the evening deepens and the temple is bathed in the soft glow of oil lamps flickering gently against the cool stone walls, the air grows heavy with the mingled scents of burning bay leaves, fresh olive oil, and dried herbs carefully gathered from the garden's edge. The temple attendant moves quietly through the sanctuary, their footsteps muffled by the woven mats laid along the marble floors, their breath steady and even, matching the rhythm of the flickering flames that cast dancing shadows across carved statues and ancient reliefs. Tonight, their task is the preparation and lighting of the night lamps, small bowls filled with oil and fitted with carefully trimmed wicks, each placed in niches carved into the sanctuary walls to provide a gentle, continuous glow through the hours when the temple sleeps but never truly darkens. The attendant carries a shallow tray holding several of these lamps, their surfaces glistening faintly in the low light, and sets them down one by one, adjusting each wick with practiced fingers to ensure it will burn steadily and not flicker erratically in the gentle temple breeze. As the lamps are placed, the attendant pauses at each to light it from a central taper, watching the small flames catch and settle into steady, warm orbs of light. The soft hiss of burning oil fills the quiet chamber, a comforting sound that blends seamlessly with the crackle of the main altar flame and the distant rustle of leaves outside the temple's open colonnades. Between lamps, the attendant moves with care, their presence unobtrusive yet deeply connected to the space, embodying the centuries-old continuity of this sacred duty. Once all the lamps are lit and placed, the attendant steps back and surveys the sanctuary, the warm light pooling across the polished floors and casting golden hues onto the carved faces of gods and mortals immortalized in stone. The flame at the altar burns brighter now, its steady glow the heart of the temple's nocturnal light, and the attendant kneels briefly in silent acknowledgement, not in prayer or supplication, but as a gesture of respect and presence, an unspoken bond between servant and sacred space. Rising slowly, they make one final check of the altar and nearby offerings, ensuring everything is in order for the night's rest. The temple feels alive in its quietness, a living space held together not by noise or ceremony, but by these small acts of care performed with steady hands and calm hearts. As the attendant moves toward the exit corridor, the flickering lamps cast long, wavering shadows behind them, and the cool night air from the open doorway flows in, carrying the faint scent of jasmine and the distant song of a nightingale. They pause for a moment, breathing deeply of the night's stillness, feeling the weight of the day lift and dissolve into the peace of the temple's eternal cycle. Then, with steps as light as the whispering breeze, the attendant retreats to their chamber, ready to rest beneath the quiet watch of stars and stone, knowing that the temple will hold its breath through the night until dawn returns once again to begin the cycle anew. The temple rests now in the deepest fold of night, wrapped in the soft embrace of shadows and flickering lamplight, its stones cool and silent beneath the canopy of a star-strewn sky. The temple attendant lies in their simple chamber, the faint scent of lavender and olive oil still lingering on the woven blanket that covers them, their breath slow and even, blending seamlessly with the timeless rhythm of this ancient place. Though the world outside sleeps in restless dreams or quiet slumber, within these walls the night flows steadily onward, uninterrupted and serene, as if time itself were holding its breath to preserve the sacred calm. Somewhere beyond the chamber's thin stone walls, the soft crackle of the eternal flame in the sanctuary drifts faintly, a comforting reminder that the temple's heart continues to beat even in darkness. The attendant's eyes flutter beneath closed lids, their mind dissolving into a haze where memories of the day's simple rituals mingle with the faintest impressions of whispered prayers, unspoken hopes, and the scent of time on warm stone. Outside, the olive branches sway gently in a cool night breeze, their shadows tracing slow patterns across the courtyard floor, and the distant call of a night bird echoes softly, punctuating the quiet with a gentle presence. The attendant, wrapped in the stillness of the night and the safety of the temple's embrace, breathes deeply, feeling the slow, steady pulse of stone and air, flame, and silence, as a living thread woven through the fabric of their being. The quiet folds around them like a soft cloak, shielding from the restlessness of the waking world. And in this moment, the temple and its servant exist as one, a place of peace, of slow time, and of endless, unchanging devotion. And as sleep deepens and dreams unfold softly like petals on a midnight breeze, the temple continues its watch, steadfast and unwavering, a sanctuary of calm that has held firm for centuries and will hold firm for centuries more, a quiet refuge where the everyday becomes sacred through the grace of attention, care, and the slow passage of time. As the first light of dawn begins to soften the darkness beyond the temple walls, the world holds its breath in the delicate balance between night and day, and within the quiet sanctuary the temple attendant awakens once more to the familiar rhythm that has guided their life for so long. The air is cool and still, carrying the faint scent of dew-laden herbs and the lingering warmth of the night's oil lamps, now burned low to flickering embers. Rising slowly from the woven cot, the attendant folds the blanket with practiced care, setting it aside as the soft light creeps through the narrow window, casting gentle patterns upon the stone floor. They dress in the simple linen robe of mourning, its fabric crisp and smelling faintly of lavender and lemon balm, and move quietly to the inner chamber where the small flame of the eternal fire still glows, tended carefully throughout the night by other temple servants who share the rhythm of devotion. The attendant kneels before the altar, hands folded, and breathes in deeply, feeling the cool air mingle with the faint scent of burning oil and crushed bay leaves. The moment is unmarked by ceremony or speech, only the silent presence of one who has stood here countless times before, connected to the unseen thread that ties the temple's past to its present and future. From the altar, they move to the preparation room to gather the tools needed for the morning ritual: a shallow bowl for water, a vial of pure olive oil infused with herbs, a folded cloth scented with dried thyme, and a small bundle of fresh rosemary, tied with twine. Each item is handled with reverence, the motions slow and deliberate, as if the very act of preparation is part of the prayer itself. Outside, the temple begins to stir faintly. A soft murmur from the outer garden where apprentices awaken, the distant clatter of sandals on stone, the rustling of leaves as the morning breeze moves through the trees. The attendant steps into the courtyard, where the early light pools in golden patches among the flagstones, and makes their way to the sacred spring at the garden's edge. There, they fill the bowl with cool, clear water, watching the surface ripple gently with each movement, then lift the vessel and carry it back toward the sanctuary with slow, measured steps. Upon returning, the ritual begins, not in grand gestures but in a series of quiet actions. the sprinkling of water in gentle arcs, the anointing of oil on altar stones, the laying down of the rosemary bundle as a symbol of purification and renewal. The air fills with the mingled scents of herbs and oil, blending softly with the warmth of the rising sun. As the ritual concludes, the attendant bows deeply before the statue of the god, offering a silent greeting and gratitude for the gift of a new day. Standing now in the soft glow of dawn, surrounded by the familiar forms of stone and wood and flame, the attendant breathes in the peace of the moment, knowing that the day will unfold as it always does, with slow, sacred care, and that within this timeless rhythm lies a quiet, enduring grace, a grace that will carry them through the hours ahead and beyond. With the morning sun now fully risen and casting a soft, warm glow across the temple's marble floors and olive groves, the temple attendant moves through the sanctuary with calm purpose, their steps quiet against the worn stones, their breath steady and unhurried as they begin the familiar cycle of daily tasks that have been performed here for generations. The air is filled with the gentle scents of fresh herbs, thyme, rosemary, and sage, gathered just hours before in the shaded garden, their fragrances mingling softly with the lingering warmth of oil lamps recently extinguished. The attendant approaches the altar where a small wooden box rests, containing offerings left by visitors during the early morning hours: dried figs, handfuls of barley grain, sprigs of olive leaves tied with simple twine. Each item is handled with reverence and care, laid out in precise order as part of the preparation for the mid-morning prayers. The attendant dusts away a few stray crumbs from the altar stone, arranges the offerings neatly, and steps back to survey their work, ensuring everything is balanced and complete. Beyond the altar, the statues of lesser deities stand in quiet rows, their carved faces softened by centuries of gentle dusting and the warm light filtering through high windows. The attendant moves along this path, offering small tokens: fresh petals, a pinch of herb, a silent nod, acknowledging the presence of those ancient figures who watch over the temple's sacred rhythms. In the adjacent chamber, apprentices prepare for their lessons, rolling papyrus scrolls and practicing the slow, deliberate strokes of sacred script under the careful guidance of the senior scribe. The attendant pauses briefly to observe, their gaze soft but attentive, before continuing their rounds through the cloisters where the scent of baking barley bread drifts from the kitchen, mingling with the faint aroma of pine resin used to seal storage jars. Returning to the central courtyard, the attendant finds a moment to rest against the cool stone of a column, hands folded loosely before them, eyes half closed in a quiet meditation on the steady flow of time within these walls. The temple is alive not in bursts or displays but in continuous care. The folding of cloth, the lighting of lamps, the tending of herbs, the arrangement of offerings, all actions performed with a mindfulness that transcends the ordinary, weaving the attendant's presence into the very fabric of this ancient place. The day unfolds slowly, wrapped in the soft cadence of ritual and repetition, and in this steadiness lies a profound peace that carries the attendant through each moment, unbroken, unhurried, and deeply rooted in the quiet holiness of everyday life. As the sun climbs higher, the temple's warmth deepens, and the attendant moves once more to the sanctuary, ready to greet the next phase of the day with calm eyes and steady hands, knowing that in this sacred cycle, every breath and every step is part of a story that has no end, only continuation. As the sun moves toward its highest point and the temple courtyard is flooded with warm, diffused light, the temple attendant takes a slow walk through the herb garden, where the familiar scents of thyme, rosemary, and lavender mingle softly in the air, their leaves rustling gently in the light breeze that carries the faint murmur of the nearby city beyond the temple walls. The garden, though small and enclosed, feels expansive in its quiet beauty, each plant carefully tended and arranged not for grandeur, but for practical use in the daily rituals and remedies that are the backbone of temple life. The attendant's fingers trail lightly over the tops of the herbs as they move through the rows, pausing occasionally to inspect a sprig of sage or to gently crush a few leaves between their palms, releasing a subtle fragrance that fills the space like a whispered prayer. The soil beneath their feet is cool and soft, a mix of earth and crushed stone that has been turned and nurtured by generations of caretakers who understood that this small plot of green is a place of healing and holiness, a living connection between the natural world and the sacred. Nearby, a low stone bench offers a place to rest, and the attendant takes a moment to sit, folding their hands in their lap and closing their eyes briefly to drink in the tranquility of the garden. The hum of bees visiting each flower, the distant call of a bird settling in the branches, the gentle sway of olive leaves overhead. This pause is not scheduled nor required, but it has become a cherished part of the daily rhythm, a moment to gather breath and ground the spirit before returning to the more structured duties of the temple. As the attendant rises and continues along the path, they collect a small bundle of fresh herbs, sage for cleansing, rosemary for remembrance, and lavender for calm, and tie them carefully with a piece of soft twine, preparing them for use in the next ritual offering. The light shifts subtly as clouds drift slowly across the sky, softening the sun's heat and casting gentle shadows that move across the garden floor like the slow passage of time itself. With the bundle in hand, the attendant makes their way back toward the main sanctuary. The air cool now with the promise of approaching evening, and the temple feels alive with a quiet energy, the steady heartbeat of stones and breath, flame and shadow, care and presence. Entering the sanctuary, the attendant pauses before the altar, placing the herbs beside the offering bowls and taking a deep breath filled with the mingled sense of earth and flame. There is no hurry, no expectation, only the peaceful certainty that this moment, like so many before it, is part of a continuing story written not in grand events but in the simple, sacred acts of tending and waiting. And as the light continues to shift and deepen, the temple holds its breath, cradling the attendant and all who come here in the steady embrace of time, silence, and endless care. As afternoon drifts toward evening, and the golden light softens, across the temple's whitewashed walls and shaded courtyards, the temple attendant moves with quiet purpose through the corridors, their steps slow and measured, each motion deliberate as they prepare for the evening's closing rituals. The air carries the mingled scents of burning bay leaves and fresh olive oil, a gentle reminder of the sacred flame that will soon be rekindled to guide the temple through the night. The attendant pauses briefly at the entrance to the inner sanctuary, where the statue of the god stands serene and unmoving, its features softened by centuries of sun and shadow, its presence a steady, unchanging anchor in the ebb and flow of the temple's life. Nearby, a low altar stone has been cleared and polished, ready to receive the final offerings of the day. Small bowls of barley, olive oil poured slowly in spirals, and fresh sprigs of rosemary tied carefully with twine. The attendant arranges each item with care, ensuring that nothing is out of place, the balance perfect yet effortless, as if the altar itself breathes with the rhythm of the offerings. Once the preparations are complete, they light a slender taper from the still-burning central flame and carry it with reverence to the smaller lamps placed along the sanctuary walls, igniting each wick with steady hands, watching the soft flames catch and grow bright against the encroaching dusk. The flickering light casts gentle shadows that dance slowly across the carved reliefs and polished stone, turning the sanctuary into a world of quiet movement and calm. The attendant kneels before the altar, hands folded, head bowed, and breathes deeply, feeling the stillness of the moment settle like a soft cloak around their shoulders. No words are spoken, no prayers allowed, only the silent connection between servant and sacred space, a shared presence that stretches back through countless days and centuries. After a long moment, the attendant rises and moves slowly through the sanctuary, checking once more that each lamp burns steadily, that the offerings remain undisturbed, and that the space is ready to welcome the night. The temple's rhythm slows, settling into the familiar cadence of darkness and light, presence and silence, activity and rest. The attendants' footsteps echo softly as they make their way toward the outer courtyard, where a cool breeze carries the faint rustle of olive leaves and the distant song of a nightingale. They pause to look upward, catching the first twinkle of stars beginning to pierce the evening sky, and feel a quiet gratitude for the cycle of days and nights, for the steady continuation of ritual and care that binds the temple and its servants together. As they turn to enter their chamber, the attendant's breath deepens, the weight of the day lifting with each step, and the temple, held in the embrace of flickering flame and ancient stone, breathes softly in the peaceful quiet of evening. As twilight deepens and the sky fades from warm amber to soft indigo, the temple settles fully into its nightly rhythm, the shadows stretching long across the courtyard, and the faint flicker of oil lamps casting a gentle glow that dances across the smooth stone walls and carved figures. The temple attendant moves quietly through the sanctuary one last time before the final rest, their steps muffled by the woven mats laid carefully along the marble floors, their breath calm and steady as they prepare the sacred spaces for the night's stillness. With hands practiced and gentle, they adjust the wicks of the lamps, ensuring each flame burns steady and true, its light steady enough to guide the spirits and pilgrims who may come during the hours of darkness, but soft enough to maintain the sanctuary's peaceful hush. They pause at the altar to arrange a final offering, a small bowl of honey, a handful of barley grains, and a sprig of fresh rosemary tied with twine, placed with reverence in the center of the stone surface. The attendant bows deeply, a silent gesture of thanks and presence, and then moves to the outer courtyard where the evening air is cool and carries the mingled scents of blooming jasmine and crushed olive leaves. Here they check the perimeter lamps, nestled in their stone niches along the garden walls, and light those that have dimmed, their soft flames flickering against the encroaching darkness like tiny stars brought down to earth. The attendant's presence is a quiet blessing on the temple grounds, an invisible thread that weaves through every corner and shadow, holding the space steady and sacred. As they walk the winding paths through the garden, the soft murmur of water flowing in the small stone basin offers a soothing background, while the rustling leaves above seem to whisper old stories to the night. The air cools further as the evening deepens, and the attendant pauses to breathe in the scents of the earth and herbs, letting the calm of the moment settle over them like a soft shawl. Finally, with the temple fully prepared for rest, the attendant returns to their chamber, where the soft glow of the remaining lamps filters through the narrow window, casting gentle patterns on the stone floor. They lay aside their robe, folding it carefully before settling into the woven cot, the blanket pulled lightly over them, the familiar weight a comfort against the quiet night. Their breath slows, their thoughts soften, and as sleep comes, the temple holds its breath alongside them, cradled in the steady, unbroken rhythm of ancient stone, flickering flame, and timeless care. The night deepens further, the temple now cloaked in a profound stillness that seems to settle like a gentle blanket over every stone, every carved figure, every worn step that has echoed here through centuries. The temple attendant, nestled in their modest chamber, breathe softly beneath the woven blanket, the cool night air slipping in quietly through the narrow window, carrying with it the subtle fragrance of the olive grove just beyond the walls. Their mind drifts slowly, unbound by the demands of wakefulness, carrying faint impressions of the day's repetitive rituals. The soft touch of oil against stone, the faint crackle of flame, the rustle of dried herbs, the cool splash of spring, water, and these memories do not coalesce into stories but float gently like leaves on a slow-moving stream, each one touching the surface without disturbance. Outside, the faint song of a nightbird threads softly through the still air, a lullaby woven into the fabric of the temple's eternal calm, while the shadows of olive branches dance lightly on the courtyard floor, cast by the flickering lamps that remain as silent guardians of the sacred space. The attendant's breath slows further, becoming steady and deep, their body settling completely into the rhythm of rest, matching the quiet pulse of the temple itself, a pulse not marked by haste or urgency, but by the slow, unbroken flow of time and care that has sustained this place through countless days and nights. The soft murmur of water from the garden basin offers a distant, soothing backdrop, while the stone beneath the attendant's cot holds the residual warmth of the day, a steady comfort beneath the cool night air. Dreams, if they come, are gentle and indistinct, whispers of old prayers, the faint scent of rosemary and thyme, the flicker of candlelight seen through closed eyes. But soon even these dissolve into a deeper sleep, one without narrative or shape, only the pure sensation of rest. As the hours pass and the temple waits in silent watch beneath the stars, the attendant lies still, held safely within the embrace of stone, flame, and quiet devotion. a living thread woven through the fabric of time, carrying forward the sacred rhythm of a day in the life that is as ordinary as it is eternal. As the first gentle light of dawn begins to filter softly through the narrow window of the temple attendant's chamber, the world outside remains hushed and still, wrapped in the quiet promise of a new day. The attendant stirs slowly, awakening, not with urgency, but with the deliberate calm that has come from years of practiced rhythm and devotion. Rising from the woven cot with careful movements, they fold the blanket with precision and place it aside, feeling the cool stone floor beneath. Their feet, a grounding presence that connects them instantly to the temple's enduring steadiness. Dressed in the simple linen robe of mourning, its fabric soft and familiar, they move quietly toward the sanctuary, where the eternal flame still burns low, tended through the night by unseen hands who share in the temple's unbroken watch. Kneeling before the altar, the attendant breathes in deeply, the air rich with the mingled scents of burning oil, crushed herbs, and ancient stone, allowing the stillness of the moment to fill their senses and center their spirit. From the sanctuary, they proceed to the preparation chamber, gathering the items needed for the morning rituals. A small bowl of water drawn fresh from the sacred spring, a vial of olive oil infused with herbs, a folded cloth scented with lavender, and a sprig of rosemary bound neatly with twine. Each object is handled with reverence and care, the slow motions themselves a form of prayer and presence. Outside, the temple gradually awakens. Apprentices begin their gentle movements, sorting scrolls and preparing offerings, while the first soft calls of morning birds echo through the colonnades and gardens. The attendant steps into the courtyard, carrying the bowl of spring water to the altar and beginning the familiar sequence of sprinkling, anointing, and arranging, each gesture precise yet unhurried, blending with the natural rhythm of dawn. The scents of herbs and oil mingle with the fresh morning air, and the soft light plays across the carved faces of the statues, lending them a gentle glow that feels both ancient and new. Completing the ritual, the attendant bows before the gods, statue in silent gratitude, feeling the steady pulse of time within the temple walls, the slow, enduring heartbeat of sacred routine and humble service. As the day begins anew, the attendant moves forward with calm purpose, ready to continue the cycle of care and presence that defines their life, woven into the timeless fabric of the temple's sacred embrace, where every moment, no matter how small, is part of a story without end. As the morning light gradually grows stronger, spilling through the temple's high windows and filling the sanctuary with a soft, golden glow, the temple attendant continues their steady rhythm of care, moving quietly through the halls and courtyards with practiced grace and calm awareness. The air is filled with the mingled scents of fresh herbs, sage, rosemary, and thyme, gathered from the garden just hours before, their fragrance lingering in the cool morning breeze that flows gently through the open colonnades. The attendant pauses briefly at the altar, where small offerings have been placed by early visitors, bundles of dried flowers, handfuls of barley grain, and simple clay vessels filled with olive oil. Each item is handled with quiet reverence, carefully arranged to maintain balance and order, an act of silent devotion that speaks louder than words. Moving beyond the altar, the attendant makes their way to the herb garden, where apprentices are already at work, tending to the rows of plants with careful hands and soft voices. The attendant watches for a moment, appreciating the steady care that sustains the garden's life, then begins to gather a small bundle of fresh herbs, selecting sprigs of lavender, rosemary, and sage, each chosen for its symbolic meaning and practical use in the temple's daily rituals. These herbs are tied together with a simple twine, the knot loose enough to be undone easily but secure enough to hold through the day's offerings. Carrying the bundle with reverence, the attendant returns to the sanctuary and places it beside the altar bowls, the scent blending with the warm glow of the morning sun and the faint flicker of the eternal flame. Throughout the day, the temple's life continues in quiet cycles. Scrolls are unrolled and rolled, lamps are tended and lit, offerings are received and arranged, all performed with the same gentle care and mindful presence that the attendant embodies so completely. The world beyond the temple walls hums with activity and sound, but within these sacred spaces time slows, settling into a calm, unbroken flow that carries the attendant and all who serve here through the hours with grace and steady breath. And as the sun climbs higher, the temple remains a sanctuary not only of stone and flame but of enduring stillness, where every motion, every breath, every quiet act of service is part of a larger story, written in silence and light, a story without. And, as midday sun filters gently through the temple's high arches and slender columns, casting elongated shadows that ripple softly across the polished stone floors, the temple attendant continues their quiet duties with unwavering calm. Each step, measured and deliberate, each movement a small prayer woven into the fabric of the sacred space. The air carries the mingled aromas of crushed herbs, sage, thyme, and rosemary, freshly gathered from the garden and carefully prepared for the day's rituals, their scents mingling with the subtle warmth of the oil lamps that glow steadily along the sanctuary walls. The attendant pauses briefly before the altar, arranging small clay vessels filled with olive oil and placing offerings of barley grains and dried petals with gentle precision, ensuring that each item is balanced and centered, reflecting the harmonious order that defines the temple's spirit. Moving slowly through the adjoining chambers, the attendant tends to the scrolls, rolling some carefully after use, unrolling others for reading by the apprentices, and checks the oil lamps, trimming wicks and replenishing fuel to maintain their steady, flickering glow. The temple is alive with quiet motion, a symphony of small tasks performed in seamless succession, each one a thread in the endless tapestry of devotion and care that has endured for generations. Outside, the faint sounds of the city drift in, through open windows, the distant call of merchants, the clip-clop of horses' hooves on stone streets. But within the temple walls, all is hushed and steady, a sanctuary of stillness amid the world's noise. The attendant breathes deeply, feeling the cool marble beneath their feet and the soft warmth of the sun on their skin, grounding themselves in the present moment, fully aware, yet serene. As the day unfolds, they move with the unhurried grace of someone perfectly attuned to the temple's rhythm, knowing that every gesture, no matter how small, contributes to the sacred continuity of this place. And as the light shifts slowly with the passage of time, the temple holds its breath in peaceful expectation, ready to welcome the next phase of the day with the same quiet devotion that has sustained it through countless dawns and dusks, a timeless haven where the ordinary becomes sacred through the enduring power of presence. As the afternoon slowly fades into the gentle hues of early evening, the temple's atmosphere softens into a quiet embrace of shadows and warm light, and the temple attendant moves through the sanctuary with deliberate calm, each step a measured echo on the cool marble floors. The air carries the rich scent of burning bay leaves mingled with the fresh fragrance of herbs gathered from the garden, sage, thyme, and lavender, all prepared earlier in the day for the evening's sacred rites. The attendant pauses before the altar, where bowls of olive oil and small offerings of barley and dried flowers rest in careful arrangement, their surfaces catching the fading light and shimmering with quiet reverence. With practiced hands, the attendant lights a slender taper from the central flame, its steady glow the heart of the temple's nocturnal ritual, and moves to ignite the smaller lamps placed along the sanctuary walls, watching as each wick catches fire and the sanctuary fills with a soft, flickering radiance. The flames cast gentle shadows that dance slowly across the carved statues and reliefs, turning stone into a living tableau of light and dark, stillness and movement. The attendant kneels briefly in silent homage, hands folded and head bowed, breathing in the sacred stillness that has settled over the temple, a deep peace that transcends words and rests in presence alone. Rising slowly, they move through the sanctuary to check the arrangement of offerings once more, adjusting a sprig of rosemary here, straightening a cloth there, each gesture performed with care but without hurry, embodying the temple's timeless rhythm of devotion. Outside, the courtyard is bathed in the soft glow of dusk, the shadows stretching long and cool over the flagstones, while the faint murmur of evening breezes stirs the olive trees, their leaves whispering ancient secrets to the night. The attendant pauses at the entrance to the garden, taking a slow, deep breath filled with the mingled scents of earth, herbs, and flame, grounding themselves in the moment before turning to complete their rounds. The temple holds its breath in this fragile hour, a space suspended between day and night, between action and rest, where every small act of care becomes a sacred thread woven into the endless tapestry of service and presence. And as stars begin to emerge softly in the deepening sky, the attendants' footsteps fall lighter, their breath slower, and the temple itself seems to sigh, a living sanctuary of stillness, patience, and quiet grace. As twilight deepens and the last hues of sunset fade from the temple's whitewashed walls, the sanctuary fills with the soft glow of oil lamps carefully tended by the temple attendant, whose footsteps fall with quiet reverence across the polished marble floors. The air is rich with the mingled fragrances of burning bay leaves, fresh olive oil, and dried herbs gathered from the garden, weaving a fragrant tapestry that envelops the space in a gentle embrace of calm and sanctity. The attendant moves deliberately through the sanctuary, adjusting the lamp's wicks to ensure a steady, unwavering flame. Their hands practiced and steady, each movement part of the temple's timeless rhythm. Pausing before the altar, the attendant arranges small offerings, bowls of barley, sprigs of rosemary, and clusters of dried petals, with meticulous care, aligning each item in harmonious balance that reflects the temple's devotion to order and sacred continuity. Lighting a slender taper from the eternal flame, the attendant kindles the remaining lamps, their flickering light casting dancing shadows that animate the carved reliefs and statues, transforming stone into a living tableau of sacred stories and silent prayers. Kneeling briefly in silent homage, hands folded and head bowed, the attendant breathes in the serene stillness that has settled over the temple, a profound peace that transcends words and rests in simple presence. Rising with gentle grace, they move through the sanctuary one last time, ensuring every lamp burns brightly and every offering remains undisturbed, the space ready to embrace the night's quiet watch. Outside, the courtyard cools under a deepening sky where stars begin to glimmer faintly, and the soft murmur of night breezes stirs the olive branches, carrying with them the whispered secrets of countless nights passed under these same skies. The attendant pauses briefly at the garden's edge, inhaling the mingled scents of earth, herbs, and flame, grounding themselves in the moment before retreating to their chamber. There, beneath the soft glow of a single lamp, they prepare for rest, removing their robe with care, folding it neatly and settling beneath the woven blanket that holds the faint scents of lavender and olive oil. As sleep draws near, the attendant's breath slows, and the temple breathes with them, a living sanctuary of stillness, patience, and sacred devotion that has endured through centuries and will continue long beyond any single life. In the quiet, embrace of night beneath the watchful stars, the temple and its servant become one, a place of peace where time slows and every moment is a prayer of presence. The night deepens around the temple as the attendant lies in their simple chamber, the soft glow of the remaining lamps casting gentle shadows on the stone walls, and the cool night air drifts in through the open window, carrying with it the faint scent of olive leaves and distant jasmine. Their breath is slow and steady, rising and falling in rhythm with the temple's timeless pulse, a pulse felt not in the noise of the world, but in the quiet repetition of sacred tasks and the enduring presence of stone, flame, and silence. The attendant's mind drifts gently between waking and dreaming, their thoughts loose and unfocused, carrying fragments of the day's rituals, the flicker of flame on bronze, the scent of crushed herbs, the murmur of water from the garden, Basin, each memory like a soft thread weaving through the fabric of night. Outside, the olive branches sway lightly in the breeze, their shadows tracing slow, shifting patterns across the courtyard floor, and the distant call of a nightbird punctuates the stillness with a gentle melody. Within the chamber, the woven blanket rises and falls with each breath, a steady rhythm that echoes the calm heartbeat of the temple itself. Sleep deepens, carrying the attendant into a place beyond words and stories, where time stretches and bends and the quiet holiness of the temple becomes a cradle of peace and rest. The flame in the sanctuary flickers softly in the distance, a sentinel of light and warmth that watches over all who dwell within the ancient walls. And as the night carries on, uninterrupted and serene, the temple and its servant remain entwined in a sacred dance of presence and care, an unbroken thread of devotion that stretches through the ages, holding firm in the soft embrace of shadow and silence. As the first light of dawn begins to stir the edges of the temple's ancient stones, the quiet world within its walls starts to awaken in a soft and unhurried manner, much like the slow unfolding of a delicate flower petal in the early morning sun. The temple attendant, wrapped in the gentle embrace of the night's lingering coolness, rises slowly from their woven cot, folding the blanket with care and placing it aside as the faint golden glow filters through the narrow window, casting delicate patterns across the floor. Their movements are deliberate and graceful, shaped by years of practiced routine and quiet reverence for the sacred space they serve. Dressing in the simple linen robe of mourning, the attendant steps softly through the silent corridors toward the sanctuary, where the eternal flame still flickers low, tended through the night by other dedicated servants who share in the temple's unbroken vigil. Kneeling before the altar, they breathe deeply, the air rich with the mingled scents of burning oil, crushed herbs, and cool stone, a fragrant tapestry that seems to hold the weight of countless prayers whispered through the ages. From the sanctuary, the attendant proceeds to the preparation chamber, gathering the necessary items for the morning rituals: a bowl of fresh spring water, a vial of fragrant olive oil infused with rosemary and thyme, a folded cloth scented with lavender, and a small bundle of rosemary tied with twine. Each object is handled with reverence, the slow, deliberate motions themselves forming a silent prayer, a testament to the sacred continuity of their daily duties. Outside, the temple awakens gradually, the soft murmur of apprentices beginning their tasks, the gentle flutter of birds stirring among the olive branches, and the faint rhythmic tapping of sandals against stone pathways. Carrying the bowl of water with steady hands, the attendant moves toward the altar, where the morning ritual unfolds in a series of quiet, measured gestures. The sprinkling of water, the anointing of oil, the placing of herbs, all performed with an unhurried grace that honors the sacred rhythm of the day. Completing the ritual, the attendant bows before the statue of the god, offering a silent greeting and a deep sense of gratitude for the gift of a new day. Standing now in the soft light of dawn, surrounded by the timeless beauty of stone, flame, and nature, the attendant breathes in the peace of the moment, ready to continue the cycle of care and presence that defines their life, woven seamlessly into the eternal fabric of the temple's sacred embrace. As the morning light settles softly across the temple's ancient stones, casting gentle shadows that shift slowly with the sun's climb, the temple attendant begins their day anew with the familiar rhythm of quiet tasks and deliberate care. Moving through the sanctuary with practiced grace, their footsteps muted against the worn marble floors, the attendant approaches the altar where small offerings rest: a handful of barley grains, sprigs of rosemary, and bowls of pure olive oil, each placed with reverence and precision, embodying the timeless devotion that flows through the temple's heart. The air is rich with the mingled scents of herbs and oil, blending seamlessly with the cool morning breeze that drifts through the open colonnades, carrying with it the faint murmur of awakening birds and distant city sounds. The attendants' hands move slowly as they prepare the items for the mid-morning ritual, lighting the lamps, arranging offerings, and smoothing cloths with gentle, attentive motions that speak of deep respect and presence. Nearby, apprentices prepare scrolls and study the ancient texts, their quiet murmurs blending with the soft rustle of parchment and the distant trickle of water from the sacred spring. The temple breathes with a steady pulse, alive not in grand displays but in the continuous care and attention of those who serve within its walls. The attendant pauses briefly to gaze upon the statues that line the sanctuary, their carved faces softened by centuries of light and shadow, each one a silent witness to the countless days of worship and service that have shaped this place into a sanctuary of stillness and peace. As the sun rises higher, the temple fills with the gentle warmth of day, and the attendant moves with calm purpose through the chambers, their presence a quiet thread woven into the fabric of sacred routine. The day unfolds slowly, unhurried, and unchanging, a steady rhythm of small acts that together form the sacred pattern of temple life, each moment held with care, each gesture a prayer without words. And as the morning deepens, the attendant breathes in the timeless peace of the temple, knowing that in this unbroken cycle of presence and devotion lies a quiet grace that sustains both servant and sanctuary alike. As the day progresses toward its quiet afternoon hours, the temple settles into a gentle stillness, the warmth of the sun softening through the open colonnades and casting dappled light across the smooth stone floors. The temple attendant moves with calm, deliberate steps through the sanctuary, their breath steady and unhurried as they attend to the small, sacred tasks that keep the temple alive. Not with grand gestures or loud proclamations, but with the steady rhythm of care and presence that has defined this place for generations. The air is rich with the scents of crushed herbs, thyme, sage, and lavender, fresh from the garden and carefully prepared for use in the day's rituals. Their fragrance is mingling with the faint warmth of burning oil and the subtle coolness of stone. The attendant pauses briefly before the altar, adjusting the arrangement of offerings, small bowls of barley, sprigs of rosemary, and delicate petals gathered in soft clusters, each item placed with reverence and mindful attention to balance and order. Moving through the chambers adjoining the sanctuary, the attendant checks the oil lamps, trimming wicks and replenishing oil to maintain their steady, gentle glow, and straightens folded cloths laid out for the next ritual. The temple breathes, quietly with the rhythm of these motions, a living sanctuary sustained not by spectacle, but by the continuous acts of devotion carried out by those who serve within its walls. Outside, the soft murmur of the city drifts faintly through the open windows, the distant call of merchants, the measured clip of horse hooves on stone streets. But within the temple, all is hushed and steady, a refuge from the world's noise. The attendant's hands move with practiced ease, their movements a silent prayer woven into the fabric of sacred space, each gesture a thread in the endless tapestry of ritual and care. As the afternoon light deepens, the attendant pauses to breathe deeply, inhaling the mingled scents of earth, herbs, and flame, grounding themselves in the present moment before continuing their steady, unhurried work. The temple holds its breath in this peaceful hour, a place where time slows and presence is the highest offering, and the attendant moves with quiet grace, a living thread woven into the sacred continuity that has sustained this sanctuary through countless generations. As the sun begins its slow descent and the temple's shadows lengthen, the air cools gently, carrying the faint scent of crushed herbs and the lingering warmth of the day's sun-warmed stone. The temple attendant moves through the quiet corridors with slow, purposeful steps, their breath calm and steady, each motion a deliberate act of care within the sacred space they have long served. The flickering oil lamps cast soft, dancing light across the carved reliefs and statues, bringing to life the ancient faces that have witnessed countless days and nights, their silent presence a constant reminder of the temple's enduring spirit. The attendant pauses before the altar, carefully arranging small offerings of barley grains, olive oil, and fresh sprigs of rosemary, each placed with the same quiet reverence as those who came before, a gesture woven into the unbroken tapestry of ritual and devotion. Moving to the herb garden, the attendant gathers a small bundle of lavender, sage, and thyme, their fingers gentle as they tie the sprigs together with twine, preparing the herbs for the evening's rites and the purification ceremonies that sustain the temple's sacred rhythm. The air is filled with the mingled scents of earth and flame, a fragrant reminder of the steady cycle of service and care that holds the temple together through the passing seasons. As the evening deepens, the attendant lights the lamps placed along the colonnades and within the sanctuary, watching as the flames catch and grow steady, their soft glow a beacon of peace and continuity. Pausing briefly at the garden's edge, the attendant breathes in the cool air, feeling the quiet embrace of night settle over the temple grounds, wrapping every stone, every leaf, and every breath in a gentle cloak of calm. The temple stands, as it has for centuries, a sanctuary of stillness, patience, and sacred presence, held steady by the countless small acts of devotion carried out by those who serve within its walls. The attendants' footsteps grow lighter as they return to their chamber, ready to rest beneath the woven blanket, their breath slowing in harmony with the temple's eternal rhythm, a living thread in the endless story of care and quiet grace. As the final hours of the night stretch quietly beneath the vast star-studded sky, the temple lies wrapped in a soft, encompassing stillness that seems to hold the breath of centuries within its stones. The temple attendant, nestled in their modest chamber, breathes deeply and evenly, their bodies sinking gently into the woven cot as the faint glow of the sanctuary's eternal flame flickers far beyond the walls. The night air, cool and fragrant with the scent of olive groves and dried herbs, slips softly through the narrow window, brushing lightly against the attendant's cheek and stirring the edges of the woven blanket that covers them. Their thoughts drift like slow-moving clouds, unanchored and free, carrying echoes of the day's quiet rituals, the touch of oil against stone, the faint murmur of water in the garden basin, the scent of rosemary and thyme mingling with warm light and ancient stone, and these impressions fade gradually into the peaceful depths of sleep. Outside, the gentle rustle of olive branches sways in time with the soft breath of the night, and the distant call of a solitary night bird echoes faintly, a lullaby carried on the cool wind. Within the chamber, shadows play softly across the walls cast by the flickering lamplight that continues its watch through the darkness, while the temple itself seems to pulse with a silent heartbeat, steady, enduring, and unwavering through countless nights. The attendant's breath slows further, their body fully surrendering to the embrace of rest, held safe in the sacred rhythm of stone, flame, and silence that has cradled generations before them. And as the night deepens, the temple remains a sanctuary of calm, a place where time folds gently upon itself, where presence is woven into every corner, every step, every breath, a timeless embrace that will hold the attendant and all who dwell here until the first light of dawn returns, to begin the sacred cycle anew. As the pale fingers of dawn stretch gently across the temple's ancient stones, bathing the sanctuary in a soft, forgiving light, the cycle of the day quietly begins anew, just as it has countless times before, and will countless times again. The temple attendant, having rested in the still embrace of night, rises slowly from their woven cot, folding the familiar blanket with practiced hands and placing it carefully aside. The air is cool and filled with the mingled scents of crushed herbs, lingering incense, and the faint warmth of the eternal flame still flickering softly in the sanctuary's heart. With deliberate grace, the attendant dresses in the simple linen robe that carries the subtle scent of lavender and thyme, and moves through the silent corridors toward the altar where the eternal flame burns with steady, unwavering light, a symbol of the sacred continuity that holds the temple and its people together across time. Kneeling in quiet devotion, the attendant breathes deeply, feeling the weight of centuries settle gently around them, the unspoken prayers and rituals of generations woven into the very stones beneath their knees. Rising, they gather the tools for the morning rite, the bowl of fresh spring water, the vial of fragrant olive oil, the folded cloth, and the sprig of rosemary, and step into the courtyard where the first light touches the garden with a tender glow. The ritual unfolds not with haste or grandeur, but with slow, deliberate motions. The sprinkling of water that cools and cleanses, the anointing of oil that consecrates and honors, the placing of herbs that symbolize remembrance and renewal. The attendant's hands move with reverence and calm, their breath steady as the eternal flame itself. And as the sun rises higher, casting golden warmth over the temple, the attendant bows once more before the god statue, an unspoken promise to continue the cycle of care, presence, and devotion that defines their life. The day begins anew, the temple breathes again, and in the endless unfolding of sacred routine, the quiet story of the attendant's service becomes part of the temple's eternal heartbeat, steady, slow, and deeply rooted in the peaceful rhythm of time and ritual. And as the world awakens beyond the temple walls inside, all remains as it should be, calm, sacred, and unchanging in its quiet grace.